So I've read all of the comments about the POV question. I started this novel with one thing in mind: I hate how most dungeon core novels are written. I really don't like the rules, the constant POV switching to stuff that isn't relevant, and other myriads of things. With that being said, with where Whispers is right now, chapter 75 as of writing this, the novel has taken off in a way that has me excited to write more. I originally had a plan to POV outside of the domain, but the more I thought about it, and the more I read the feedback, the more I realized that it wouldn't be good. So any and all POVs will be in the domain since it makes the most sense, and since I wrote this book to have a dungeon core, ESQ, novel, I want to stay away from the stuff that doesn't make sense. A huge problem with many dungeon cores is that they tend to be, well, rinse, repeat, style with a few diamonds in the rough, and I want to push on the boundary a bit. I've already come up with a few key things to keep the story fresh and exciting, most of which relies on Calix's potential of being a domain core, and the story she has been building. One big idea that I have been pondering over, which will play a key role, is kingdom building. I've read many LLTRPGs, dungeon core, and various other novels, and one thought had always struck me. Why does the MC just kinda accept a world filled with magic and not do anything special with it? Someone with knowledge that we take for granted now and see as well common sense, but to someone from a time period that many novels like this take place in may be revolutionary, or even world-changing. Without spoiling anything, let me tell you that Calixa will be pushing many boundaries in the future, and Asteria will become a very lovely fusion between modern-day concepts and the impossibility of magic and undead. Smiley face. P.S. Don't worry about anything that might break this novel, like modern-day guns, or nukes. Anyways, enjoy. Join my Discord and Patreon if you want to support me. I stared out across the small gathering of undead that stood under us. They were all clad in the same military uniform and had various weapons and gear. However, what really had me worried was that the second warrant officer's name was tinted red. There was a mini-boss here. I glanced towards Gunther and back out across the outpost, unsure about what was to come. So, how are we going to get off of this one? I'm not sure myself. If that wall gives, we will have even more to contend with before. Think we have a solid chance of fighting our way out? He gripped the staff and paced around. He was worried, and I don't blame him. However, we have fought our way out of even worse situations than this. I think if we... My sentence was cut short when a horrible groan overshadowed the sounds that the other undead were making. I stepped back and drew my sword as I saw movement in the corner of my eye. Rising from the wooden flooring were two ghostly figures clad in a uniform that looked much like the one the undead below us wore. However, the most significant difference was that this uniform was dark, vibrant purple, and a stark contrast to the sickly green, translucent flesh. I quickly analyzed the two new foes, and my heart sank all the more. Praetorian Neophyte Squire. Praetorian Neophyte Squire. Both of their names were green, with a touch of red, which told me they were on the cusps of mini-boss strength. I believe they were both spirits, which would be difficult for us to fight as it was. The only way we could harm them was through the use of magic. I was a duelist and lacked any sort of magic, and Gunther could use the most basic of magic. I mashed my teeth together as I brought my sword to a guard position. Our situation was growing even direr with each passing second. We stirred a hornet's nest when we entered this base. But I refused to die here, not when I had so much on the line. The spirits both held swords that looked much like the sword that the warrant officer held. However, these had a blue twinge that seemed to permeate them. It was almost as if the sword was slowly becoming as incorporeal as its user. I eyed my friend from the corner of my eye and gazed at me. His face told me he was worried about winning, which was rare. I turned my focus back to our foes and stepped forward as I channeled my duelist focus skill. Everything around me faded as I took stock of my opponent before me. Usually, I would never use this skill against more than one opponent, but I trusted Gunther more than enough to do it. I already knew that I couldn't harm the spirit. What I really needed to do was just buy us some time as we tried to work out a plan to escape. My foe bared its sword in the same way. Its face was a little clearer with the skill active since it toned out most of my surroundings. The spirit seemed to be a male with a shaved head and wore an angry snarl across its face. I wonder why the spirit was so angry. Was that how it died? With a heart full of hatred? I gripped the hilt of my sword and shrugged away the thought. It didn't matter. All that mattered now was that we were about to fight, and I refused to die here and join them. In a flash, the spirit crossed the distance between us, almost catching me off guard, its sword rushing towards my face. I stepped to the side, dodging it. Out of instinct, I sent my rapier forward with pinpoint accuracy towards where I knew the heart to be. However, much to my surprise, the spirit pivoted and used its hand to push away the blade and quickly launched a counterattack. Its blade flashed towards my face, forcing me to activate my sidestep skill to dodge it. My body jerked as I landed, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest and the muscles in my legs burned from the usage of that skill. Sidestep was a high-leveled movement skill that essentially sent your body into overdrive for a split second, and I could only use it twice more before my stamina reserve plummeted to critical levels. I took a deep breath and steadied myself. I activated my second intention skill, which would allow me to feint once before delivering another blow with increased strength. With a thought, I used my advancement skill and rushed forward. The spirit placed its second hand in its blade, preparing itself for my attacks. The tip of my rapier rushed forward towards its face, and it twisted its sword to block. However, the second half of my skill activated, and I flourished my blade towards its chest. However, instead of taking the blow, the spirit stepped in and to the side, bringing its sword down. Without a second thought, I activated sidestep and moved backward, out of the range of its blade. My legs screamed, and it took everything I had to stay standing. I only had one more before my body couldn't take any more. I could feel the beads of sweat as they ran down my head and legs. My lungs were burning, and my vision blurred slightly from the use of sidestep. I was a renowned duelist, but this spirit was something else. Whoever trained it was a monster. I was starting to think that the label above its head was slightly off. I cut my focus skill and kept one eye on my foe while searching for Gunther. I saw him on the other side of the room, dancing around the spirit, blocking a flurry of blows coming in his direction. While I was sucking down air, I searched around the area. We had to make a run for it, and we were in no state to fight our way out, especially with how powerful these two were. I glanced at its name and saw that it was a neophyte, which meant this was the bottom of the barrel. If these two were that strong as beginners, I didn't want to fight anything above them. I circled around my foe as I tried to find an opening, to either attack or to make a break for it, but Lady Luck was not on my side today, with anything. The spirit and I exchanged a few more blows as I tried to stall out more time. Thankfully, however, we were pulling about even in our exchanges. Neither one of us could gain the upper hand, and my companion was about the same. We circled around each other in a tight dance as we activated skill after skill. But my stamina was slowly dropping, so I had to rely on tighter footwork and stop being so aggressive. It was just tricky. Everything I threw at this spirit was dodged or deflected with minimum effort. Shifting distances countered each strike and forced me to overextend far more than I liked. The spirit was goading me into opening myself up, and I was falling for it each time. If it wasn't a spirit, given time, I could probably wear it down, but at the moment, I was beating my head against an unmoving wall. I activated a blocking skill and narrowly avoided a blade that was plunging towards my heart. I stepped backward as I took a few more deep breaths. Gunther stepped back as well, spinning his staff around. His face was cut and bleeding in multiple places, and his staff was chipped and flaking. "How are you doing, buddy?" I asked through my heavy panting. "Not so good. I'm getting my ass handed to me." His voice was tired, and he sounded like he was on the verge of collapsing. Usually, we could pace ourselves better, but these spirits were hitting us hard and fast. Oh, how glorious it must be to not have to worry about stamina usage. The two spirits circled us like cats, toying with their prey. I steadied my blade and focused on them once more as I was prepared to give them everything I had. If I was going to die here, it would be with my blade in my hand. Gunther must have come to the same conclusion as he pointed his staff outwards. "I think this might be it." It may be so. Just do me a favor. Die last, so you can kill me once more if I become one of those things. I refuse to live a life as an undead." His words were heavy and sad. Though I knew better than to pity him. He was a soldier first and foremost, and I knew he wasn't scared of death. "I'll do my best." I swallowed another gulp of air, and I could feel the summoning stone pressing against my hip. Maybe if I used it, I could save us. I dropped my hand and patted the side where the stone was reassuring. There was still a chance for us to get out, and it wasn't the end yet. We both took another step back as the spirits pushed forward. Their blades hung menacingly in the air as if they were taunting us about our death. Just as I activated my next string of skills, the sound of wood cracking filled the air and drowned out the drone of the undead for a moment. It must have shocked the two spirits as well, since they tore their attention from us and searched for the source. Much to my surprise, however, instead of continuing to fight, they rushed towards the edge and jumped. Gunther and I spun around to see what happened, and I felt my heart drop a bit as I watched the wall crumble from the constant barrage of attacks from the zombies outside. The wall exploded outwards, and zombies began funneling through the gap that formed. However, terror quickly gave way to relief as I watched the former soldiers turn and confront the undead pushing into the outpost. The relief was so strong that it threatened to buckle my knees. Finally, we had a chance to escape, now that everything was distracted. Seeing our chance, Gunther and I threw ourselves off of the building. Thankfully, since we left most of our gear back in the safe zone, the fall wasn't too bad. Nothing a quick tuck and roll couldn't fix. I impacted the ground and quickly exhaled my held breath, and immediately began running. A quiet impact that followed shortly after told me that Gunther had landed. We both ran towards the door we entered, hoping to make it away quietly, while all the other undead seemed to fight amongst themselves. I quickly pulled away the wooden slab, threw it away, and swung open the door, letting Gunther out first. I threw back my head, making sure that we were not being followed. However, what I saw was shocking. Even more of the uniform undead were pouring out of the now visible buildings, quickly swarming the small horde of undead pushing into the outpost. My heart was hammering in my chest as I watched the carnage unfold. It was terrifying. This domain was unlike anything I had ever experienced, and every facet of knowledge I thought I knew on the undead proved wrong. I tore my attention away from them and followed Gunther out. We hurried past the outpost and down the road, confident that all the zombies' attention was on the soldiers they were attacking. I could feel my chest throbbing from how hard my heart was beating. Fear spurred me forth as if they were flames licking my heels. I didn't have the energy to fight anything else at the moment. Fighting that Praetorian absolutely drained me. It forced out all my last resort skills and countered everything that I could throw at it. Once we were out of distance for most of the undead, I stopped and spun around. The soldiers in the outpost seemed to have already pushed out the bulk of the zombies and were already cleaning up the stragglers. What really chilled my blood was that the two Praetorians had already fought their way through and seemed hellbent on catching us. Shit, we need to make a break for it, I called out to Gunther as I booked it even faster than before. I prayed to whatever gods existed that Carter and Alinor were nearby. The muscles in my legs were close to giving out, the pain in my legs seemed to only grow in strength with each step I took, and they felt like they were tearing. I threw another panicked look behind me and saw that they were gaining on us with each passing second, and for the second time today, I felt like I was going to die. That was until I saw the familiar silvery strands of lunar magic as they tore a divide between us and the Praetorians. Alinor drifted from in between the trees and casted another spell, which quickly condensed into a silvery dart and shot towards the one on the right. Unfortunately, it dodged to the side yet didn't make a further move to chase us. They stood there menacingly for a moment, staring at us before they turned and went back into the direction of the outpost. I almost fell from the relief that coursed through me. Well, mainly because my body was nearing its limit. Gunther reached out and caught me as I fell and supported most of my weight. Thank the gods, I muttered to myself as Gunther helped me walk. What in the nine heavens happened out there? Carter asked as he materialized from the trees. 3 arrows were already locked into his bow, ready to be fired at a moment's notice. We snuck into the outpost, but there was a strange skeleton waiting for us. Before we could kill it, it rang a bell and made a break for it. However, before we could follow it, we were engaged by those two spirits. Almost killed Gunther and I both before the zombie horde broke in and all hell broke loose. I quickly explained as my walk turned into a limp. The after effects of quick steps quickly started to damage my body, and I wasn't sure how much more I could take. Wait, 2 spirits almost overpowered you and Gunther? How is that even possible? Carter asked us, his voice laced with no small amount of skepticism. They were at least adept swordsmen, and they moved as if a war maiden trained them. Gunther spoke between huffs. He clearly wasn't in any better shape than I was. I mean, we were both taken by surprise, and they forced many of our last resort skills out at the start of the fight. That doesn't bode well. Hopefully, the War Maiden isn't undead. If we encounter her, I doubt we stand a chance. We don't have enough ranged fighters to make much difference. Maybe once you two recover, we might be able to pull something off. I nodded my head, agreeing with Carter's statement. War Maidens were renowned fighters, able to master any melee weapon given to them. There weren't many around because of the class evolution requirements and the rarity of titles needed to get it. But those that were around were fearsome fighters. There were very few people who could go toe-to-toe with high-leveled ones. Hopefully. Anyway, let's head back to the safe zone. Gunther and I need a chance to recover. Carter nodded while Eleanor rifled through her small bag and brought out a shimmering red liquid encased in a glass vial. Here, take one. This should help cut a lot of the pain. Once we get there, I can focus on healing you too. Eleanor passed the potion over to me while she went to work fishing out another for Gunther. I quickly hit the cork and threw back the thick liquid. It rushed from its container like a thick syrup and coated my tongue with the taste of an acidic strawberry. Though much to my chagrin, the acidity was much more potent than the fruit. Almost immediately, I felt better as a liquid warmth flowed through my veins. I could feel the muscles start to stitch themselves together and reposition. I never really got over how the potion worked. It felt like thousands of ants crawling under my skin, fixing everything wrong with one swoop. It was a godsend. The sad part was that we could only use one potion a day. Otherwise, our bodies would react negatively and start forming strange growths both on the inside and outside. Once that stage occurred, well, it was over. You would grow emaciated, and your hair would start falling out, and eventually, you would just pass away. As the potion worked its magic, I could finally stand of my own volition. It didn't help my stamina any, but it made walking much easier than it had before. I passed the glass vial back to Eleanor since keeping it would help cut the cost of having to refill it down. Thanks. How many do we have left? I asked as I rolled my neck, trying to work out the kinks and letting the potion fix whatever was wrong. We have 6 more in total. Ah, that was good enough to bail us out of any situation that may come our way. Hopefully, we didn't need to use them again. Alright. We should be back in the safe zone in just a few minutes. Once we get there, we need to take a break and discuss our findings a bit. I stumbled into the cabin, my legs close to giving up. Even with the amplified boost of the potion, I was still on fumes. I walked through the hall, and into the main living area, and over to the couch. I threw myself onto it, desperate to get off of my feet. Tiny sparks of pain danced through my calves and radiated up through my stomach. I really hated using sidestep, and I was still in the process of training the skill down for the stamina reductions. If I didn't need to sleep or eat, I would have finished it by now. But alas, I am only human. There is only so much that I can do in one day. I rolled onto my back as the rest of the team entered the cabin and found seats. I stared up at the ceiling and took a deep breath in through my nose, and noticed something strange in the air. Since I have been here, only the scent of death assailed my nose. But this was far softer, and it was almost human. Do you guys smell that? I asked as I sat up and began looking around the room. Smell what? Carter asked as he stood up and walked over to the window, choosing to monitor our surroundings. It smells different here. Like the scent of fresh grass and a lake. I told them. I sniffed again as I tried to pinpoint the source. I stood up, ignoring the pain that was flaring in my lower half, and followed it. I had an acute sense of smell, or at least thought I did. I followed the smell around my bags, where it seemed the strongest before it seemed to trail off around the cabin. I quickly undid the wrapping around my bag and looked through it, and nothing seemed to be missing. Are you alright, boss? Carter asked without tearing his gaze from the windows. Yeah, I'm just tired. That fight took a lot out of me. I quickly put everything back together and sat back on the couch. Maybe I was just starting to lose it and was imagining things. However, before I lost hope, I had a thought cross my mind. Eleanor, do you see any traces of magic in here? She gave me a strange look before she activated her skill. Her eyes shifted colors as she looked around the room. Her questioning expression quickly shifted into a shocked one. Why, yes. There appears to have been a very high-level teleport into the room and a teleport out a few moments later. As she said that, I quickly sat up. Carter, do a quick sweep of the room. Eleanor, do you see any magic tampering with anything in here? My mind quickly went into overdrive as I tried to think of everywhere we could have been tampered with. We are supposed to be the only ones in this domain. I was on high alert as I rummaged through my bags. All the vital potions were kept on Eleanor's person, so I wasn't worried about them getting tampered with. My biggest concern was our food supply. I brought out all of the food and quickly laid it out. Eleanor, Carter, I need you to check over our food supplies for any sort of tampering. Mostly magic and/or poison. I started pulling out whatever equipment I left behind and quickly inspected it. I ran my fingers across them, looking for any breaks or any spell residue. Food's clear, Redrick. No sense of any magic in it. Eleanor's soft voice filled the cabin. No poison, at least from mid-tier down, is present. I doubt anyone would use anything higher than that here. I nodded my head and sat back. Just check over the equipment, Eleanor, see if anyone left a spell on it. It was stupid leaving our equipment here. I was fully expecting us to be alone here, and no one else was allowed in the domain until we completed our investigation. But the presence of a high-level teleportation spell was troublesome. I stood up and limped over to the window and glanced outside of it, and looked around. This place has defied all levels of expectations. Nothing here makes sense. The undead was unlike anything I have ever dealt with. They were utterly devoid of any controlling factor and seemed to make choices on their own. They were even fighting amongst themselves. It really made me even more curious. Who was the Empress? What power did she possess to make them act this way? Was she a friend or foe? With a sigh, I tore my gaze from the outside and limped back over to the couch. Eleanor was still busy inspecting the bags and equipment. Gunther had already passed out on one of the couches. The cuts on his body were rapidly healing from the potion he had drunk earlier. Those Praetorians were powerful. I probably could have beaten them if they weren't spirits, but that was neither here nor there. We would have to be more careful and not split up anymore. If any of those Praetorians caught us on our own, we would be screwed. We all sat in silence until Carter spoke up. So, Redrick, what's the plan for now? For now, we lie low. I have no idea what ringing that bell did, and to be honest with you, I'd much rather lie low for some time, at least until we figure out what's next. I settled onto the couch and laid back. Little flares of pain coursed through my body. I really hated having to use sidestep more than I needed to. This pain sucks. Fair. Eleanor and I will take our first watch then. Once you wake up, we can rotate out. I nodded my head in agreement as my eyelids grew heavy. All right, I'll only be a moment, I told him as I threw my arm over my eyes in an attempt to keep out some of the ambient light from keeping me awake longer than I had to be. When I woke up, my body was pulled taut, and my muscles were sore. I pulled myself off of the couch and could feel my bowels twisting, crying out to be relieved. I sat up and wiped away my bleary eyes and glanced around the room. Gunther was awake and was staring outside. His hand on his staff, poised and ready for action. I shoved down whatever I was feeling and kept myself low to the ground as I made my way over to him. What is it? I asked as soon as I was close enough to him to whisper. The undead are on the move. But this time, it's the military. I tore my gaze from his face and looked outside and saw a small formation of undead marching down the road. It was composed of primary zombies, all using swords, followed by a few skeletons that wore heavily padded gloves. Leading the front was a spirit with a spear. They were all equally spaced and marched with purpose down the road as if they were looking for something. Ah, well, now we finally know what that bell did. It seems the military here is still very alive and well. What are your thoughts on the matter? I pulled away from the window and walked over to the table, ignoring the desire to use the restroom, at least until I knew we were safe. I'm not sure, Redrick. I detest the undead with everything I have. To me, they are nothing more than mindless husks, but the ones here are different. They are smarter and more dangerous than before, and it doesn't bode well for the rest of the world. He pulled away from the window and walked back towards the couch. I disagree. Maybe we should find this Empress that the ferryman was talking about. If we find her, we can get some questions answered. The mobs here are tough, but they don't seem interested in the outside world. All they really seem to care about is staying here and patrolling. I rifled through the papers on the table, seeing if I could find anything of use. Something that would give us more information about these lands. While that may be true, think about what the rest of the world will think. Unless we can prove beyond any doubt that this domain means no harm to the outside world, Velcrest is going to be up in arms about destroying this place. I know you don't want this place destroyed, but from where I'm standing, this place is unnatural. The dead walking once more isn't right. He glared at me, anger burning in his eyes. I understand that, Gunther. I do. The undead bothers me just as much. With all the stigma surrounding them, it's only natural for them to be hated, but just think about what this place can offer. Actual combat against foes with classes and not monsters. Gunther, 2 of those mobs who pressured us to no end almost killed us, and we aren't pushovers. Imagine what the Adventurers Guild can get out of this, better yet, imagine what Corinthinia's military can get. We can finally rise out of the shadows of Velcrest, and most of all, we can retire and never have to do this ever again. I put the papers down and stared at him, begging him to understand what I was coming from. Yes, but what if this empress decided she was tired of just sitting here and set her sights on the outside? Rhetoric, necromancers, do not control these zombies. The skeletons do not have a core, and ghosts and spirits are wandering around here without a worry. Hell, just one of those Praetorian neophytes could tear through an entire squad of infantry without a problem, and if we infer that a neophyte is the lowest of the ladder, just imagine what something higher can do. This place has too many variables, Rhetoric. There is too much that we do not know. I gritted my teeth and clenched my fingers around the edge of the table. He was right. I know he was. But I needed this place to exist. I need the rewards and the fame. I can't keep living like this. Listen, Gunther, let's find the Empress then and see for ourselves what this place is. I just can't let this place get destroyed without a fight. We change the world with this discovery, and most of all, we can finally stop being adventurers. The vein on his head twitched, and he clenched his jaw. I know he doesn't want the undead to live, but all I had to do was convince them and the rest of my team. Fine. We will find the Empress and figure out her plans. I released a pent-up breath. Thank you. He nodded his head and stood back up, and walked back towards the window. I looked around the kitchen before I used the restroom and finished exploring this place. Once I returned, I looked at all the newspapers and thought about what I had to do. I needed to talk to Carter and Eleanor. We really have spoken little since we arrived, and Eleanor was a woman of few words, and Carter was, well, Carter. I needed to get their input on the matter, and I just felt as if I was neglecting them lately. I sighed as I went through the stack of papers, hoping to find something of use. Something that could shed some light about the area that I was in, and most importantly, the location of the Empress. Using what I knew as a noble, I had two thoughts. The first is that I would be in the capital. Seeing as how this place isn't quite that large, that left me with a second option. A heavily fortified military encampment. There was an even louder bell that rang out before all hell broke loose. So we would have to look there. If we were unlucky and couldn't find her there, I still had the summoning stone. I wasn't even sure if the Empress was the core of the domain, so I was rolling a die on using it. If I used it and found out she wasn't, I would risk my life and the team's. If I used it, and she is, I could still potentially be risking my team. I knew how hard mobs fought to protect a dungeon core, and I would be a fool to think that a domain core would be any different. Gunther, once Carter and Eleanor wake up, I'm going to talk to them and figure out how they feel about this place and tell them about the plan. Afterward, we are going to explore more. He nodded his head but said nothing else. No doubt he was still angry about how things went. As I was looking through the newspaper, I caught a mention of the Praetorians. I set the rest of the stack down and skimmed through it. It really only mentioned how, under the guidance of Alessia, the Praetorian Guard was reorganized and subject to a new training process by decree of the Empress. As I read, I realized precisely what they were. They were the personal guard. That would explain why they were so strong. I set the paper down on the table with no small amount of stress. This was going to be much harder than I thought. I gave my hip a pat and felt the stone press against me. Perhaps I would use this, but I would have to find the right time. I sat at the table and looked through the newspapers and quickly jotted down some notes. I was slowly building up a surplus of information to bring back to Paris. My mind was made up on doing my best to ensure that the domain would still be standing after this. But I knew it was going to be an uphill fight. I stood up and carefully grabbed a few of the newspapers and folded them so I could place them into my holding bag to bring back to the guild. I would need every piece of evidence I could get my hands on, no matter how small it seemed to be. Once I was finished, I set my bag on the table, and a yawn escaped from my lips, followed by a quiet rumble in my stomach. I would eat once Eleanor and Carter were up. At least that way, they can get something too. I limped over to the couch and sat down again. Gunther was over by the window, watching the road to ensure that nothing was coming our way. The undead we were not all that worried about. It was whoever teleported into the safe house that had us worried. But we should beat them as long as they don't get a drop on us. I sat down and flipped through my notes, making sure I detailed the route we took, as well as the conversation with Karen. Even the stronghold and how the undead seemed to fight each other. So far, everything was looking good, and I couldn't complain about it. Hopefully, whatever we uncovered next would be what we needed. As I was flipping through my notepad, the quiet squeal of a door swinging on its hinges tore me from my thoughts. I glanced in the bedroom's direction, and I relaxed slightly when I saw it was Carter. Hey Carter, can you come over here? I need to talk to you about some stuff. Sure, just let me take a leak real quick. His voice grew quiet as he walked through the cabin, and I nodded my head as I made a mental list of what I needed to talk to him about. The first thing was his position on this domain and whether I could talk him into joining Gunther and I. The next was how he and Eleanor were doing. I took a deep breath and played the conversation through my head a few times to make sure I got it to sound right while I was waiting. "What's up?" he asked as he sat down on the couch next to me. He was wearing a tight black shirt that clung to his muscles like a second skin. His pants were also tight and left little to the imagination. All for the sake of creeping, I guess. "How do you feel about the domain? We haven't really talked much since we arrived here," I asked as I kicked my feet up on my bag, taking a moment to relax. To be honest, I'm not really too concerned about it. Eleanor and I talked about it a bit, and she says the magic here is far different from what necromancers use. It's more free and pure, and the undead seem to have more control over themselves." He reached up to his necklace and ran his fingers across the moonstone. "I see. Well, Gunther and I decided we wanted to find this empress. To see if this domain was truly evil or not." Carter's face twisted slightly as he thought it over. "Knowing you, Redrick, there is more to it than just that. What do you really want from this place?" His words hung in the air between us, and I judged just how much I wanted to tell him. "Just a little of the truth won't hurt. I want to restore my family, Carter. I want to restore my name and no longer be that disgraced noble. This domain is my stepping stone to doing that. I'm tired of being an adventurer, and I'm tired of looking death in the face every day. What I really want is to stop running from the nobles that ruined my life and stripped me of everything that I knew and loved." The words poured from my lips as anger flared in my chest. It wasn't fair. It wasn't fair that I was out here risking my life day after day to just scrape by while the ones that took everything from me sat around a table gorging themselves on wine and women laughing at my family. Sometimes, Redrick, some things are better left forgotten. If you keep trying to pursue that path, then you will only die in the end. They won't sit back on their laurels watching you get your life together. The second that they even get a whiff of you doing something they don't like, they will try to dispose of you. You know this." I clenched my teeth and tried to calm myself. "I know. It wasn't fair. I wanted this all to end. I wanted Gunther and those two to live a happy life, one that wouldn't end because of me. I so badly wanted to send them away, to protect them, but I knew I couldn't do this independently. If the time ever came that I had to trade my life for theirs, I would. They didn't deserve to be dragged into this. I know, Carter. This is the last mission. This is our last step. If we can do everything right and prove that this domain doesn't harm the outside world, we are set for life. You and Eleanor can settle down, and Gunther can move on, and I can finally retire, and I can be free to rebuild my influence." He closed his eyes for a moment and nodded his head. "Redrick, how long have we known each other?" The strangeness of his question caught me off guard slightly. "It's been a few years. Since my dad died, actually." As I spoke, I found myself falling back into memories that have long since passed. "Yeah, it's been quite a few years, all right. But regardless, you would consider us friends, no?" He opened his eyes, and as soon as mine met his, I noticed that they felt much different than what they usually did. These were the eyes of a man who has seen far too much and carries a burden. "Well, yes. Why wouldn't I? I mean, we stopped being associates when I saved you from that viper of Ardask." I laced my concern at his statement with a bit of a joke since I was still figuring out what he was getting at. He sighed and ran his fingers through his hair. "Listen, Redrick, there is a lot that you don't know about me, and Eleanor for that matter. If I tell you this, I need you to keep it a secret." "Of course, Carter. I'll keep it between us." I shifted forward, curious as to what he was about to say. "Do you know what the soulbound curse is?" Carter asked as he mindlessly fingered the moonstone on his chest. I thought it over and consulted the information in my head. "It rings a faint bell, but I'm not sure." "Why?" He looked at me for a moment, his sea-blue eyes glimmered with sadness as he spoke. "The soulbound curse doesn't really exist anymore. So I'm not surprised you know little about it. Essentially, you are soulbound to another person. If they die, you die. If you die, they die. Then you are reincarnated over and over. The cycle is to be forever unbroken." As he spoke, I felt my eyebrows raise, and the realization hit me like a wagon. "You and Eleanor are soulbound." He nodded his head, and a faint grin crossed his lips. "Ages ago, Eleanor and I fell in love. We pledged our love to Aphrenia, the goddess of life and love. She accepted our pledge and gave us what we sought. She told us that nothing would split us. Neither God nor time. We were to be lovers until eternity ended. At first, it was great. We lived happy lives and died of old age together. We were reborn and restarted our lives. We have done this cycle countless times. He kept fingering the moonstone on his chest, his eyes glazed as he was reliving memories I could only dream of. I kept quiet as I let him open up to me since I was unsure of what to say or do in this situation. But as much as we love each other, we are both tired. For a few brief years, we get caught in the realm between life and death before it thrusts us back into flesh. We meet, we have a family, but we both know that death will never claim us. Every life plays out the same. We grow old together and die. One of us gets murdered, and we both die. One of us doesn't make it at birth, and we die. Only to be brought back into this cycle over and over. Living life over and over is tiring. His face twisted in a grimace, and for a time, I could see the damage that time had racked on this man. Gone was the face of a confident, suave ranger, and in its place was the face of a man who couldn't escape time. One who was chained to his fate due to his unending love for his partner. Do you think this domain might break the curse? He stared off into space, fingering his necklace. I hope so. At first, I wasn't sure about it, but when I heard Karen make a comment about the Empress severing the hold that the necromancers had, it gave me hope. If it's true, then the Empress might be able to do something. I love Eleanor more than anything else in this world. It's only fair that I find a way to break this curse so that we both may rest. I could feel my heart clench in sadness as I nodded my head. I thought I had it rough, but I couldn't imagine what they were feeling. Does Eleanor know you are doing this? Carter shook his head and pursed his lips. No. I haven't told her. As much as she vehemently denies that she wants it to end. I can see the exhaustion. Hopefully, this is the last lifetime that we have to live like this. It's all right, Carter. We will find the Empress and see what we can do to help. I meant those words with all my heart. I would do anything for these three. Thanks, Redrick. It means a lot. The age on his face quickly vanished, and he went back to his usual suave self. Now, let's go find this Empress. We were closely shadowing a small formation of undead soldiers. The fog had mostly cleared and instead was more like a faint haze. The sun had risen in the sky and sat near the middle. Clouds were far and few. As we pushed further into the forest, the trees seemed to be a little livelier than before. The smell of death also didn't seem to be as pungent here. Which was strange. The soldiers marched ahead of us with their weapons drawn. They have seemed a little more agitated than usual, so we had to take extra precautions to stay hidden. The two leading the group were both zombies. One held a metal spear, while the other used two metal gloves that looked a lot like a set of brawler's gloves. It was mostly composed of zombies and skeletons. However, some undead entities looked like ghosts. Ghosts were a fairly common type of undead, and they rarely needed a necromancer to revive them. Instead, they were only born when the dead were improperly buried. The best way to describe them would be that they were just the shadows of their former selves. A lost memory that would slowly fade away. Most wisps that existed were ancient ghosts that had regressed into a ball of energy. This place continued to shock me with each passing moment. The undead here seems to defy all logic. Even the fact that they had classes was terrifying. It left me with quite the moral dilemma. If this domain ever attacked the surrounding area, it might wreak a lot of havoc before it could be subdued. Granted, many of the mobs here wouldn't be able to stand up against the highest ranks of adventurers or even a few of the mercenary companies that a few of the surrounding countries employed. But the damage would be significant nonetheless. On the other hand, these mobs' classes would be an excellent boon for whatever country claims this domain. The experience that it would grant would be great. Both in combat experience and advancement. It would provide soldiers and adventurers a chance to practice in actual combat without worrying about going to war with another country. Both options seemed great, but it was just a matter of figuring out this domain. There were too many variables and not enough answers. We pushed along the road, and we passed a small lake. Its waters were as blue as a sapphire, and the trees surrounding it were full of life. In fact, many of the undead seemed to have a slight aversion to place. At least it looked like it from how they shifted their formation as they marched down the road. I glanced at my three companions and then down the road as the formation slowly moved away from us. Let's stop here for a moment. If another patrol passes, we can follow them. If not, then we stick to the road and see where it leads. Everyone murmured in agreement, and we pushed through the foliage. We decided to leave a large portion of our non-vital supplies at the safe house to cut our carrying weight a bit. I brought along the most vital things, like food, water, and anything else that could be tampered with. Eleanor carried all of our magical supplies, and Carter carried a few things for our weapon repairs, while Gunther was to carry overnight supplies. The plan was to get back to the safe house before the sunset, but just in case, we brought stuff to camp with. The only thing that bothered me was that I had no clue what kind of horrors existed at night here, and it wasn't something that I was too keen on finding out. At least this lake seemed to be a little safer than the surrounding area. We broke through the last bit of foliage and entered a small beach-like area. Here, the scent of death wasn't as pungent as before and instead smelled like fresh water and moss. In fact, it smelled a lot like that scent in the safe room. We fanned out across the area, which was pretty much empty. The only thing I saw was a large rock on my right that overlooked the lake. I climbed up its jagged surface and clambered over the ledge and onto its top. The massive rock looked as if someone had smoothed its surface. I squatted down and ran my hand across it, marveling at how well polished it was. I sat down near the edge and overlooked the lake, and decided to enjoy the view. The smell of death was long gone, and if I really focused, it was almost like the undead were just a horrible memory. But it was only temporary. I took a few extra moments to look over the lake before climbing back down, which was a little more challenging than the way up. Each time I gripped a stone, it would shift, and my heart would jump in my chest. I wasn't all that concerned about dying from the fall since this boulder wasn't that large. What really worried me was breaking bones or destroying our supplies. Eventually, I managed to reach the bottom and land back on the sand. I glanced around, taking in the surrounding environment, and walked over to the lake. I reached the shore and glanced at the water. It was as clear as day, and not a single drop of debris clouded its surface. Not even a single living or non-living thing seemed to be in here, well, as far as the eye could see anyways. It seemed to be rather deep since a large void spanned deep underneath that swallowed all the light. I touched the surface and felt a rush of energy, and a lot of the fatigue that I felt was washed away. I felt like I had just woken up after a long night of rest. I pulled my hand away and glanced to my right and saw Eleanor close by, staring at the water. Her eyes radiated silvery energy as she looked over the lake. It was odd not seeing Carter by her side. Even more so after the conversation we had earlier today. It made me wonder if he told her I knew about their curse. Maybe it would be best if I kept my mouth shut for now about the topic. "What do you see, Eleanor?" I asked as I got closer to her. She tilted her head slightly as the magic faded from her eyes. "Oh, hello, Red Eric. It's hard to describe, really. It has a heavy concentration of life and water mana. However, it's coming from the bottom of the lake, which, gauging from how long the strings of mana are, is quite a ways down. I don't think we could reach it." She ran her fingers through her hair and stepped back a bit. "That would explain a lot. What do you think it is?" I crossed my arms, and tore my attention from her face, and shifted it back to the lake. "It may be a nexus. At least, I can assume that it is, based on how much mana is being radiated outwards. However, what is bothering me is that the mana here is acting strangely." I shifted my attention back to her. I wasn't much of an arcane scholar. To me, it was like listening to a dwarf tell me about how to properly build. I could only pick out essential parts and maybe understand through context. But any sort of information is vital. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my notebook. "How so? Tell me about it." "Well, for starters, even though this place is filled with the undead, there isn't death mana in the air. In fact, it's a blend between death and life magic. It's strange how they are interacting with each other. The nexus here seems to pull death magic out of the air, turn it into life magic, and send it back out. As soon as the mana leaves the radius of this place, it blends back into the environment and mixes with ambient mana. It's acting like some sort of magical construct and empowering each other." Her eyes shifted back into the same silvery gray energy as she looked around some more. I quickly jotted down the information, even though it didn't mean too much to me. It would mean a lot to the guild. As I wrote what Eleanor said word for word, she looked around again. "Do you think you can find the source for this strange magic? Something has to be creating this absurd mana." I'm not gonna lie. My knowledge of magic is pretty basic, so hopefully, she understands the question. "From what I can tell, it's coming from the air and the undead that live here. It's so strange, the way the two blend together, you could almost mistake it for life mana." Her face scrunched up as she started to fervently look around again. "The mana seems to be interconnected with everything here and forms a bit of a maze. Though I'm sure that if we follow the maze, we may find the core at the end. The mention of the core piqued my interest quite a bit, though I had to quell the rising thoughts in my stomach. What do you think of the mana? Is it something valuable we can use? Can you pinpoint the core as well? She pursed her lips as the magic in her eyes faded again. A thin sheen of sweat appeared on her brow, and she closed her eyes. I'm not sure. It's unique. As for its application, I would have to see if I can manipulate the potential, however, I'm not sure. It's not like anything I have ever seen before. The core, well, once I recharge my mana, I can see if I can locate it, though I can't promise anything. The magic here is jumbled and twisted by all the mobs. But I can do my best. It's all right, Eleanor. Take a rest, I'm sure we can find it. I gestured to the ground, as I fought with my mind, as the possibilities only seemed to grow. It wasn't looking as grim as it had before. We stuck around on the lakefront for a short time before we gathered our gear. In that time, we gathered a bit more information on the mana that existed here, along with its interactions with the environment. As far as we were concerned, we had uncovered a new type of mana, which alone was a significant turning point in our travels. Once everyone was ready to go, we traveled on the road, keeping a low profile. Already a few patrols had passed by when we were at the lake, and none of us would take a chance to get into a fight. With how wrong our information was on this undead, stealth would be our best bet for now. The fog had already started to condense a bit, but not enough to impede us as we traveled. How it seemed to move reminded me of a tide. There were peaks where the fog was so thick that I could hardly see my hand in front of my face, while other times, it was almost non-existent. What really bothered me about it all was the light here. The longer that I stayed out in the open, the more it gnawed at me. The coloring was off, just enough for me to perceive it, but not enough to put my finger on what it was. But by the gods, was it annoying. I hugged the road and kept my eyes open for any threats in front of us until, at long last, a large wooden door stood before us, framed in by a sizable battle-worn stone wall that looked like it was on the cusp of crumbling into ash. A few undead soldiers patrolled on the walls, and 2 stood at attention on either side of the gate. As I checked them out, the design philosophies behind the uniform struck me. It acted as a sort of camouflage and seemed to blend in with the fog. The design of the clothing was ingenious. We would have to be a little more careful moving forward from now on. As we pressed further on, we came across a little foxhole a small ways off the road and settled in there, so we could scope out the structure and be safe from prying eyes or a patrol that could come up behind us. What do you guys think? I asked as I kept my eyes on the road leading in and part of the massive gate door. It looks like a stronghold. The walls are low, so they can be scaled. However, they aren't low enough to vault, at least at our level. They have tight formations that are patrolling the area. Judging by the fact that they are undead, there are no guard shifts, so we can't rely on that if we want to infiltrate the area. The more that I look at how they move, the more I realize they are competent, so we can't make a diversion. Gunther's eyes danced across the walls of the outpost as he looked over the undead soldiers. I can cloak us when nighttime comes around. The undead shouldn't be able to see unless they have detection-based magic. Eleanor told us softly as the sound of metal squealing on its hinges filled the air as the door swung open. We pressed ourselves as low as possible as we watched an even larger detachment than before emerge. At its forefront was a giant skeleton clad in thick padding that had the same color scheme as the rest of the undead soldiers. Its fist was contained by 2 gloves with a band of metal around the knuckles. Above its head was its name written in flowing violet script. Lieutenant Aaron Flint, the Undying Fist. I froze as I pressed myself as low as I could. There was no telling how far its detection radius was. Hell, bosses never roamed past its designated area. Gunther and Carter scooted forward while Eleanor pressed herself behind us. That is a fucking monk-class skeleton. Who the fuck wants to fight something like that? Carter hissed quietly as he looked over the skeleton as it marched down the road. Its retinue of soldiers looked to be lower ranked, outside of a unit called a centurion, and a high-ranked warrant officer. I grimaced as I watched it walk away. We just weren't equipped to fight something like that. The closest things we had that could damage it would be Eleanor and Gunther. Maybe Carter, depending on what arrows he used, but that was about it. I clenched my fist and felt worthless. No matter how much I fought the gnawing doubt that stuck around in my mind, I couldn't keep denying how I felt. This domain made me feel useless. We were constantly fielded with threats that we couldn't deal with. While they were only zombies, the zombies had no reliable way to kill them since they lacked a necromancer overlord. We couldn't afford a drawn-out fight with one since the patrols rotated, lest we get ambushed. Not to mention the ghosts and the spirits that were here. We would need a dedicated magic caster that could harm one, paired with a superb swordsman that could go toe-to-toe with one while the mage did its work. The skeletons lacked a core, so the only way we could disable one would be through brute force, which we lacked the equipment for outside of Gunther. They also roamed in packs, shoring up their weakness, which meant that trying to fight a squad of them would be painful. While we could do it, it would be risky. The more that I saw of how they operated, the more the horror built in my chest. They were smart, and whoever led them knew what they were doing. But as much as the skeletal monk bothered me, it also offered us an opportunity. With the boss gone, we could infiltrate the stronghold. I glanced at my HUD and saw that it was around 1800 hours in the domain, which means that the sun was setting soon, which would put Eleanor at her strongest. Now we would just have to wait for that moment to come. It was 2100 hours, and the sun had set. The boss hadn't yet returned, so we still had a chance. Eleanor cast Light Obscureness, which refracted the portion of the surrounding air, hiding us from all but those who could pierce the veil of magic. The second that the spell was finished casting, we moved across the road as silently as possible, avoiding some of the undead that had wandered up to the wall. The two guards stepped forward brandishing spears and stabbed the zombies through the face, instantly dropping them. That was good to know. If we targeted the head, then we could take out the zombies. We moved across the length of the wall until we came across a portion that was blown inward and had a small collection of 10 undead that stood guard there. 2 of them were warrant officers, with the first was a zombie that wielded a bow, and the other was a spirit with a sword and a shield. They both stood there unmoving, staring at the wall, waiting for anything to pass through. The other undead behind it were at the ready, standing as if they were statues. I was envious. If I had guards like this, then I would never have to worry about getting attacked. It must be great being inexhaustible. But I quickly shoved away my jealousy. Now wasn't the time to lament about stuff like that. As we all crowded around the breached, I checked out the area, ensuring that we were still clear. I took the lead and was the first to pass through the opening. That way, if anything were to happen, I could distract the undead and let my team escape. I carefully navigated through the stone-ridden area and crept past everything, and once I was in the stronghold, I relaxed slightly. Now all I had to do was wait for the rest. A few seconds later, the other 3 crept in behind me, careful to avoid any of the loose stones and anything else that could reveal us. My heart quickly pounded as I glanced around at the faces of all the other undead, ready to jump into action at any second. Once everybody was in, I released a pent-up breath, but I was careful enough to do it as quietly as possible. I moved silently, leading my team through the stronghold as we tried to gauge what was in here. The first thing that caught my interest was the stone remains of a fountain in the middle. One that looked like someone redid it recently, yet there was no water flowing through it. A few buildings dotted on the perimeter, yet the largest was 2 stories in size and overlooked the stronghold. A stone's throw away from an area covered in ash and the remnants of wooden structure, and a few undead stood close by looking at it. Though what was going on in their minds, I couldn't even begin to guess. Sadly though, we didn't have time to explore the area since the spell would fade soon. I set my sights on the biggest building in the area since that is typically where the most important things were. The only issue that I could see was getting inside without the undead knowing. Especially since standing next to the door were 2 undead centurions. I quickly looked over the building and saw a window on the first floor that we could sneak through if we were careful, and once we were in, it would be smoother sailing from here on out. If we didn't get caught, that is. I pulled myself up through the window and reached and helped up Gunther and then the other 2. Once we made it through, we found ourselves in a small barracks-type room. A row of 10 cots filled the room, with lockboxes at the foot of the bed. I found it quite hilarious, especially considering that the undead didn't need to sleep. At this point, these were just the memories of a bygone era. We all fanned out to explore it and rummage through the lockboxes. Luckily for me, I found a few coins that I quickly pocketed, and some strange white dust that I quickly saw was from human bones. Once I slid it into my pocket, I tried to not think about how it became a powder. At the end of the day, all that mattered was that I would make some coin off of it. Once everyone had gathered back together, there were no words spoken between us. We all knew the risks if we were caught. But we didn't need to talk to know what we had to do. Carter walked over to the door and pulled out a small mirror and quickly shifted to the prone position, and slid the mirror under the decaying wooden door. Gunther and I quietly slithered over to the sides of the door, with Eleanor taking the middle, her wand at the ready. My heart was calm, and my mind was sharp, ready to react in a split second. Gunther's hand was on his staff, ready to take out anything that came our way. I watched Carter as he scanned the next room over before he pulled his hand back, and made the all-clear motion, and quickly stood up, bringing his bow up to bear and knocking an arrow. I nodded my head and reached out to the door, and dragged it open. I was careful and took my time, but the quiet squeal of metal filled my ears as I moved. Fucking hell, why can't this ever be easy? I grit my teeth as I opened the door wide enough for us to slide through. Carter was the first through since he had a ranged weapon, and Gunther before I followed suit. We stood in a long hallway with a spiral staircase that stood near the end. All the rooms were closed, and not a single sound dirted the air. If we were fighting other creatures, that would be a good sign, but here, that only made us more cautious. I took the front with Carter and had a hand at the ready, my spell barrier ready to activate the second I needed it to. I really wanted to explore more to see what we could find, but it was risky. We were deep within enemy territory and only had the barest hint of how to fight our foes. For now, we would see if we could find this Empress, and then we would go from there. We pressed down the hall and past a large wooden double door. I had a feeling it would lead to the main lobby, but that wasn't our target. We would scope out the second floor first and see if we could find anything of use. We made it to the staircase and quietly made our way up. As we turned the corner, we came into a large hallway. On the far wall was a glass window, and at every door was a torch that cast an ominous orange light across the stone flooring. The only thing that bothered me was that a zombie was shuffling down the hall away from us. If we want to move any further, we have to take care of it. I glanced at Carter and gave him a slight nod. He pulled back his arrow and steadied his shot while I crouched down, ready to cross the distance. My hand passed over a small piece of debris, and I threw it softly down the hall, trying to pull its attention toward us. The small chunk of stone landed with a slight clatter, causing the zombie to whip its head towards us. In an instant, an arrow flew past my head and went straight towards the zombie soldier that stood before us. Before it could even utter a noise, a sickening noise filled the hall as the arrow pierced its eye and sank into its brain. I activated my movement skill and darted across the hall and caught the body before it could hit the floor. I had to hold my breath from the sheer smell that emanated from its corpse as I gently set it down. We shouldn't be here long enough to get caught. I pulled the arrow from the eye of the undead and quickly used its uniform to clean the tip before I motioned for the others to join me. Your party has slain a zombie legionary. Experience points have been distributed to everyone in the party. I inspected the hall, trying to figure out which room would be our best bet, and I didn't want to open a door and find more undead waiting for us. So I had to choose carefully. I glanced at all the doors, took a leap of faith, and chose the door next to the window. At least that way, if we fucked up, we could still make a break for it. We assumed our usual breaching position, and I reached out towards the handle of the door. I pushed it inwards with a soft click, revealing a small room with a desk in the center. A torch hung from the ceiling, illuminating a desk with a quill and a small container of ink. Next to that was a small book filled with writing. Once everyone was in, I closed the door behind us and walked over to the desk. The chair was decaying and looked barely sturdy enough to hold a body, so I just pushed it to the side and reached out towards the book. The date was smudged out, but the writing was still there. Gunther and Carter took up positions by the door while Eleanor activated a magical skill and looked around. From what I could read, this was the journal of the Legion's captain, who went by the name of Ricard Levian. I flipped to the first page and read through to see if I could glean anything of use. The first few entries mainly were him lamenting this position yet understanding the importance of defending this area. Apparently, this was a strategic point that needed to be held at all costs. He said if it fell, then the entire southern border would be open to attack. As I read further, the entries became more organized and less hateful as the captain remained here. There really wasn't much there for a few years. At least until I got to an entry that wasn't smudged and was written just a few years ago. It detailed a minor skirmish between the Asterians and a faction known as the Razna. The skirmish was due to some nearby resources, but as the fighting went on, they found that a large army had amassed nearby, leading to an all-out war. As I read on, the captain became increasingly frantic as he detailed many hit-and-run maneuvers by his forces to stall the approaching army. But because of other wars occurring, he lacked any reinforcements. The next-to-last entry states how he received a small detachment from the Royal Guard and sent much of his forces to help evacuate the towns beyond the stronghold since he knew he couldn't hold back the approaching army. The very last entry states that he had accepted that this was his end and hoped that the Empress would forgive him for his failure. The enemy is at the gates, and most of my forces have pulled out to help the outer cities evacuate into the inner realm. A good deal may call me failure, but this is the only way. I can't let all my troops get slaughtered trying to hold back this tide. I alone, along with what's left of my men and the royal guards stationed here, will hold back the army for as long as we can, but I know it's for naught. The enemy is plentiful, and we are all exhausted. The only thing that keeps us going is the knowledge that the longer we fight, the more we can save. May the Lady forgive us for our failure. I closed the notebook, and I felt sadness overwhelm me. Every soldier we saw here stayed behind long enough to protect the civilians beyond these walls. Even at the cost of their lives, they stayed behind to act as a rear action. What is it? Gunther whispered as he glanced at me from the corner of his eyes. This place. Every soldier here sacrificed themselves to buy time. I whispered back as I tucked the journal into my bag. Gunther's eyes widened before he nodded his head. He, of all people, knew what that meant. A glimmer of respect shone in his eyes as the words sunk in, and I tore my attention back to the desk. I had hoped to find something else that would help us, but no use. We would need to leave soon and get back to the safe house. That way, we could plan out our next move. I walked over to the door and opened it. I glanced out and looked around and saw that there was still nothing there, which was strange, considering that we were in the base's heart. We all stepped out into the hall when I noticed something was wrong. The flames at the end had gone out, and my instincts were telling me to run the opposite way. The other torches flickered as a gust of wind blew through the hall. The sound of metal striking stone filled the hall's air with a rhythmic interval that slowly got closer. But the most chilling part of it all was that on the bottom of my hut for the very first time, a long health bar appeared framed in by an ornate frame. On top of that was a name that made my blood run cold. Captain Ricard Levian, the stalwart. Just as I brought up my shield, the tip of a sword slammed into it. A small cluster of sparks cascaded to the side, and I was pushed back a few inches from the sheer strength of the strike. From the shadows, I could see set of milky white eyes fixated on me and radiated a fierce intelligence. A silver bolt of magic rushed over my shoulder and slammed into the chest of the zombie, which caused him to jump back into the darkness. The remaining torches flickered as the darkness seemed to crawl along the walls toward us. We need to move, we can't fight in this space, I called out as I tried to look around the hall. The only way out was the window or behind the boss, but we couldn't fight in this tight environment. The walls would keep us locked in, and we wouldn't be able to use our full strength. But if we busted the window, the entire base would know we are here, which would be just as bad as fighting another boss. I grit my teeth as I tried to work through an exit plan. If we broke the window, we might be able to make a run for it, as long as we can get past the undead. We just couldn't be on the main road back. I raised my shield to intercept another blow from the zombie and was pushed back another few inches. Dozens of cracks lined the magical surface, and it flickered, and I knew it wouldn't be able to take much more. Gunther, break the window. You three make a run for it. I'll hold this creature off. I grabbed my sword and brought it forward, and steadied myself. Are you an idiot? You can't fight this boss alone. His words struggled to break through the noise of shattering glass. I'll be okay. Make a run for it, and I'll be close behind. I'll meet you at the safe house as soon as I can. I stepped in front of them and held my sword upright and towards the captain. My eyes narrowed as I tried to make out his form through the darkness, but it seemed almost alive and like it was trying to quench the surrounding light. You better, you still owe us that round of ale. Carter yelled back to me. His voice trailed away. I took a deep breath and steadied my nerves. This wouldn't be my last resting place, I refused to let it be so. I would just hold out here for a moment before I too jumped the window and made a run for it. We could handle a boss, but not a boss in the heart of the enemy stronghold. Besides, my team's life came first. If I could keep them alive, that was all that mattered to me. This was a risk that they didn't have to take. I saw the faint glint of steel rushing towards me, and I activated my Pasado Sado skill. Time slowed down as I quickly threw my weight down. The captain's sword moved past my head, and I barred my sword straight towards his chest and activated double strike. I couldn't see in the inky darkness, but it was worth a shot. The tip of my rapier rushed forward and impacted the zombie's chest. However, before I could cancel my double strike skill, I saw a cascade of sparks rain down from the tip of my sword. Fuck, he was wearing armor. I really needed to move. If I wanted to stay alive, it couldn't be in this room. It had to be where I could see properly. Otherwise, it would be like throwing myself against a brick wall. I activated a quick step and shifted back to my original position. My body burned in protest from using that skill once more in such a short time, but it had to be done. Without a second thought, I flung myself from the window. The ground rushed up to greet me as I fell, but just as I impacted it, I shifted into a roll to distribute the weight. I threw my glance around to see what was happening and saw that my team was nowhere in sight. But the undead were in a frenzy as they poured from buildings and shored up the gate and wall breach. Getting out of here would be a pain in the ass, but since it was just me now, it should be doable. But just as I tried to run, the sound of something heavy slamming into the ground caused me to pause, and I spun around and could finally see the zombie clearly. Well, he, since it was clearly a male, stood almost 2 meters tall. His hair, unlike the other zombies, was still intact and looked to be high and tight. The visible parts of his flesh were gray and covered in a thin layer of slime that still seemed to ooze. Parts of his face were rotting, revealing the bone underneath and a few brown teeth. He was clad in metal armor with an ornate design that could hardly be seen through the dirty and dried blood. His left arm was broken and twisted in a strange direction but would twitch now and then. But the worst part was the darkness that seemed to rise from the surrounding ground. Tendrils of inky darkness rose like wisps of smoke wrapped around him as if they were snakes. The moonlight seemed to bend as it touched the veil of darkness before it vanished. He took a step forward and seemed to grow larger as a sliver of fear embedded itself into my mind, and the air tried to force me to my knees. You are under the effects of intimidation. Your movement speed has been reduced by 25%, and your stats have been reduced by a quarter. Shit, this boss was no joke. His intimidation skill must be upper middle tier if it's cutting everything by a quarter. I brought my sword to bear, and the darkness condensed around him, forming sets of runes that flowed around him like water. To top it all off, he was a mage. Damned spell blades are annoying as shit. Why does everything here have to be a pain in the ass? I gritted my teeth and prepared to use my barrier once more. Since my stats were quartered, I had to be fully prepared for anything that may happen. The captain brandished his blade, which looked like a long sword, but was tapered down to a fine point. It reminded me of a court sword, which means that I would have to be worried about pinpoint strikes. So this would be a battle of the duelists. I glanced around me to get a bearing on the undead in the area and saw that they were encircling us, but made no further motion to attack. The dozens of eyes on me made me feel like I was a lamb on the way to the slaughter. Was this how the gladiators at the arena felt? I cleared my throat and observed the captain. The darkness wrapped around his sword and, in a blink, he vanished and reappeared in front of me. The tip of his blade came barreling towards my throat. Oh, he didn't play around. As I brought my arm up and centered the shield on the palm of my hand, forcing it to condense down into a point. I only had one chance at this. I caught the tip of the blade just before it hit my throat, and I felt my arm scream out in pain as a sick crack filled the arm and threw me back a few feet and into the ground. I gritted my teeth as I stood up. My entire left arm was on fire, and the pain was gnawing away at my concentration. I didn't have the strength to fight him, and that status effect was cutting down my choices. I baited my arm as I glanced around, trying to see if there was a small opening that had yet to be filled by the undead. I glanced back at the captain and then to the spot once more as I tried to plan an escape route. If I could slide past the undead, I could quick step to make some distance and get to the breach. It was just a little odd that they didn't seem to be closing me off entirely. I sheathed my sword and glanced at the spot once more, deciding that it was now or never. Without a second thought, I turned tail and ran as hard as I could. It tore at me that I was running from a fight, but I didn't stand a chance here. I pushed my legs as hard as I could as I slid past the outstretched fingers of zombies. My arm screamed out once more as the sudden movements kept shifting it. With the wall breach in sight, I activated Quick Step and quickly closed the distance. Though at the cost of losing stamina and another wave of pain. I stopped and threw a quick look behind me and saw that the undead still stood where they were. The captain, however, was calmly walking towards me, his sword brandished to the side and wrapped in flames that were as black as night. The undead parted around him like the sea as he calmly kept walking. My heart clenched in fear as I turned and ran as hard as possible through the breach and into the forest, ignoring the main road. Now I understand why they didn't stop me. I ran through the thick trees, the foliage reaching out and cutting minor scratches into my face, yet I ignored them as I ran from the monster that was following me. I ran for what felt like hours, but it was about 10 minutes. The boss's health bar was still there, but the intimidation effect was long gone. How was it still following me? Didn't that break the conventions of how bosses operated? I ran and ran until I came across a patch of forest that seemed even more dead than the rest. A few deceased zombies sat near the edge, but I didn't question why they were there. All that mattered to me was escaping from that monster. I slipped into the unknown part of the forest and sat behind a tree. My breath was heavy in my chest, and my heart was pounding. I was in an unimaginable amount of pain, and it took everything that I had to stay conscious. I glanced at my notifications now that I had a chance to breathe, and I saw I was suffering from a broken arm and some darkness poisoning. The broken arm didn't mean much to me since my natural regeneration would fix it. But I would need Eleanor if I wanted to cure the darkness part. I leaned against the tree and saw that the boss bar had finally vanished. Even so, that meant little to me. I knew he was hunting me. I took a deep breath and glanced around to see where I ended up. The trees here were even grayer than the other parts of the forest. In fact, I would say that they were sick. Something was afflicting them. I saw a zombie corpse nearby, and I shivered as I saw it was recently eaten. Whatever was here was something that I didn't want to deal with. I looked around the trees, and I felt like I was being watched by something, though I wasn't sure by what. I sat there for a bit before I rummaged around in the small bag of holding that I kept around my waist and reached in for my emergency potion. This was a quick, oh shit kinda deal. This was one of those moments, mainly since this potion was rather expensive. I brought the potion up to my lips, however, it shattered in my hands before I drank it. The crimson liquid splattered my pants, and debris of glass rained down. I instantly went on high alert and brought my sword to bear while trying to baby my broken arm. Well, look who we have here, lost in the woods. A little noble. The voice was bitter and condensing and not one that I recognized. Who are you? I asked as I pressed myself into the tree. The darkness hung around me with the fog, obscuring everything. I glanced around the area, trying to discern any movement, but there was nothing. A mere undead would have been incapable of a shot like that. Well, now I wasn't so sure. Oh, no one, really. The male voice tore through the shadows, and I saw a form materialize. It was a man that stood at roughly my height and was clad in a long, flowing black cloak with the hood raised. But what terrified me was the white dagger painted across the front. I gritted my teeth and bared my blade towards him. I wouldn't fall into the trap of asking why he was here or how he got here. That was pointless. I had a feeling why he was here, though. To finish the job that started long ago. Well, sorry, I'm not ready to die. 2 more assassins materialized from around the trees. One had a bow while the other had a long sword. I could easily fight them if I didn't have a broken arm. But they broke the fastest way I had to fix that. I kept my eyes on the 3 of them as they circled around me. They were cautious, which would make moving on them a little more challenging. The one with the sword dashed forward, bringing his weapon around in a deadly arc. I dropped my body weight down at the last second, and it passed over my head, leaving a gash on the tree behind me. Moving on instinct, I stepped forward and launched a jab towards him. The pain in my arm flared up as it shifted. The assassin stepped back and parried my blade, and the other launched an arrow at the last second, causing me to fire a third quick step. I created some distance and tried to run. I dipped behind a tree and quickly activated lunge while monitoring my stamina bar. If I hit critical levels, I would die. Redrick, running won't save you. You are going to die here. The man's bitter voice was a small way behind me as I plunged deeper into the forest. Those blasted nobles and the power games that they played. I hated them. I hated them all. All just to solidify more power, and for what? It didn't matter who they stepped on to get to the top, so long as they got there. I held my tongue as I dipped behind another tree. This time, the feeling of being watched was even more potent, and it was coming from the trees. Now that I thought about it, it was odd that there wasn't a single mob in this area. Well, ones that weren't already permanently dead. Die here. A voice rang above me. One that croaked and sounded like it had never spoken before. It was coarse, heavy, and, most of all, the hair on the back of my neck rose. Going to die here. More voices joined the first, each different, but they talked in unison, repeating the same word, each time, the voices getting clearer and more apparent, and sounded like the assassin that followed me. I shivered as I stared into the canopy and the forest floor, trying to cover all the angles. But I saw nothing, not until I heard a screech that filled the air. One that sounded like nails against a chalkboard. A sound that made me want to turn tail and run as fear coursed through my veins unbound. My body froze and refused to react. The only thing that I could move were my eyes. My eyes quickly scanned the area in a panic before I saw a set of orbs that glittered in the night. First, there was 1, then 2, and more kept coming until I saw at most 10. They stared at me from the shadows of the trees. Just sitting there watching me. Yet, I could do nothing but stand there. You have been paralyzed by fear. A few seconds passed by before I could hear the steps of another walking towards me. Ah, have you finally decided to just give up? The assassin's voice sounded next to me, and I desperately fought to move, and I couldn't even open my mouth to speak. Well, it doesn't matter anyway. I saw a glint of steel in the moonlight, and I screwed my eyes shut, mentally cursing every last member of the noble court. I would come back to haunt them all, and I would make them pay. However, the blow landed on my good shoulder, pinning me to the tree. My assailant let out a surprised shriek, and I opened my eyes. I saw a scrawny creature with patches of long, stringy hair matted together by grease. Its eyes were muddy brown, and its teeth were all sharpened to a fine point as it bit into the shoulder of the assassin. Slimy flesh glistened in the moonlight as it rode the assassin as he tried to throw it off. More gasps of surprises filled the air around me as more of the creatures fell from the tree. Finally, my fear wore off, and I reached up and pulled the knife from my shoulder. Seeing my chance to escape present itself, I reached up and pulled the dagger out and quickly threw it to the side and made a run for it while everyone was distracted. I ran for what felt like hours until I came across an area that looked as if it used to be a training ground, and thankfully it was empty. I stumbled over to a small structure on the outskirts and fell inside. My vision swam, and my body was going numb. My stomach twisted as nausea rocked my body. I rolled inside and stared at the ceiling as thoughts slowly drifted through my failing vision. Was this how I was supposed to die? For the first time since my father died, I cried. I failed everyone, and, most of all, I failed myself. I dragged my team into this, and for all I knew, they could be dead. With much difficulty, I pulled myself across the floor and propped myself against the wall. Even though those creatures caught the assassins off guard, I knew it wouldn't last long. They would be after me soon enough, and then my team if they were not already dead now. I felt my heart break as I realized the depths of my failure. A dry cackle left my lips as I stared out across the training area as I replaced my weakness with rage. I refused to die here. I have never been this weak before. So why now? The rage helped push me to my feet, and another round of pain shot through me like 1,000 fire bolts causing me to drop once more. My health bar was slowly trickling down, and my anger faded. Please, I didn't want to die. Not here. Not alone. I would do anything to not die here. As the sorrow flooded my mind, a thought drifted on the tide. Didn't I still have something? The pain started to leak into my mind, and I became delirious as fire filled my veins. One that I faintly recognized as another toxin. What did I have that could help? It was something important, right? I was slowly losing consciousness before it finally hit me. I had that summoning stone. I reached into the hidden pocket and stared at it. The patterns on it danced around and seemed to be filled with life as they took various shapes. The way the lines moved and shifted threatened to drag me into it once more before I shook myself out of it. I held it in the moonlight, and I realized then just how fragile yet heavy it was. The way it seemed to weigh into my palm and sear my flesh with the coldness it seemed to radiate. Without another thought, I crushed the stone, and a line of text tilled my vision. Please wait, summoning domain god. God, huh? I thought it was just a simple core. I felt my eyelids grow heavy as time seemed to stand still, and a magical formation appeared on the training field before me. The shape was lost to me, but it reminded me of snow with how intricately they crossed each other as they spun around, locked in an eternal waltz. Pulses of violet light started to fill the air, followed by soft orange lightning bolts that struck the ground. The pain that racked my body came to a halt. My breath caught in my throat as a form rose from the middle of a formation. The first part that I saw was a mask covered in whitish purple and a color that I immediately recognized as being the same as Ki. Then long, flowing honey brown hair caught the wind. The being was wearing a long, flowing cloak with colors that made me feel as if I was staring into eternity itself. The right hand was clad in some strange metal that reminded me of glass, though the left hand was clenched in a fist and covered in a myriad of scars. I sat there dumbstruck as I realized I was staring at the core of the domain. I thought cores were supposed to be just, well, cores, not a living being. I used my analysis skill once more out of habit than anything else. Level 1 Calixa Asteria Empress of Souls. I felt despair at looking at her level. A level 1? I may have just killed us both, but her color was one that I had never seen before on a named text, and that was the color of freshly polished gold. But just before I opened my mouth to speak, I saw another notification appear. this time, it was a global notification. A boss in the domain has awakened and evolved into a unique race and boss type. Slay it to receive unique accolades. As I stared at the Empress before me, I could only wonder at what I had done. I lay there as my body grew slightly weaker. My mind was sluggish, and it was getting harder to focus. Please. My mouth grew drier as I watched Calixa walk close to me. The display of magic would have alerted the assassins to this location, so it was only a matter of time before they got here. Eventually, the Empress got close enough that I could see a pair of eyes that were far greener than any emerald I have ever seen. I felt my skin crawl as they traveled across me, waiting for me to speak. Help. Take my soul, take whatever you want, but please, make sure that my friends get out of here. My lips felt dry and chapped, and the taste of iron coated my tongue. She tilted her head as she gazed at me, and a strange filament of gray energy appeared and wrapped around her like a snake, before it vanished once more. You want help? Her voice was softer than I imagined, and in a way, it seemed to bring me a sense of peace. Yes, please. I don't care if I live or die, but my friends, they are all that I have left. They can't suffer because of me. The act of talking was getting even harder, and a heavy breath punctuated each word. I was dying, and I knew that there was very little I could do about it. My life for theirs sounded like a good trade. She kept her distance as she squatted and stared at me. A strange emotion flickered in her eyes as she regarded me for a moment before a small silver runic circle appeared underneath her, revealing a scarlet-red potion in a glass jar. This should help you out a bit, no? She asked as she walked over to me and slid it over while keeping her distance from me. Maybe being on the verge of death was causing me to hallucinate. But did she just create a potion out of nothing? I regarded the glass for a second before I took it. I mean, I was dying anyway, so what could this hurt if it did actually finish me off? My hand trembled as I brought it to my lips and closed my eyes, sending a prayer to whatever God was listening, asking for some shred of forgiveness. The tart liquid entered my mouth and coated my tongue, and vitality immediately entered my veins, chasing away the fatigue and rapidly fixing the damage that the poison and darkness were doing to my body. Though it wasn't quite enough to cure it, it did wonders to keep me alive. My arm screamed out one last time as the potion pulled the bone back into place, and I could feel my skin stitching itself back together. I spat out another round of blood that had gathered in my mouth and I stared at her in awe. She just produced a mid-grade health potion out of nothing. We sat there in silence as my body came back together, though I knew I was still in no condition to fight yet. So, about me helping you. I have a... As she spoke, a noise sounded out behind us. A slow, methodical clapping. Well, what do we have here? A dying noble and an empress. Today just keeps getting better and better. She spun around and stepped in front of me, which shocked me. I was an intruder on her lands, and yet she was still going to protect me? Her cloak billowed in the soft gust of wind as she stepped outside, blocking me from them. You don't have to do this. Just leave me here, help my friends escape. I croaked out, and I refused to let someone else die because of me. She threw her head to the side and affixed me with her emerald eyes. You asked for help. So I will help you. The tone in her voice sent shivers down my spine, making it clear that she was daring me to challenge her. I bit back my tongue. She was right. I was the one that asked for her help. But that didn't mean that she had to risk her life for me. They will kill you. I'm not worth it. I tried to beg her, convince her to let me go. Her eyes bore into me, and she shrugged. I'll be okay. Her voice wavered for a second as if she wasn't sure of that herself. But as soon as I opened my mouth to send a retort her way, she spoke again. Now shut up and let me help me. Her voice had even more conviction than before, and I sighed. I had a feeling if I kept pushing it, I would not win. Fine, I replied as she shifted her focus forward. The assassins that followed me here appeared from the shadows looking only slightly worse than where. I don't know what you want from the man behind me, but he and his party now belong to Asteria. Leave now, and I will spare your lives. Her voice was muffled only slightly by the mask, but the threat was clear as day. What really got me was the fact that she said that my team and I belonged here now. They would kill me if they found out I bargained their souls for this. It wasn't even my place, and I still did it anyway. I am sorry, Ms. Asteria, but I'm afraid I cannot do that. My employers paid a pretty hefty sum for his head. Just give him to us, and we will leave quietly. The lead man stepped forward and dropped his hood, revealing a face covered in scars. His hair was non-existent, and a single ring hung from his nose. No. The air grew thick as the tension grew. The wind howled, and the distant peal of thunder rang out as the two faced off. I wanted with all my heart to believe Calixa was strong, but that level 1 next to her name gave me no hope. Especially against 3 trained assassins. For well over a minute, the two stared at each other. "So be it," he said as he pulled his hood back up, and I saw an arrow let loose from beside him. The arrow rushed towards me, and I relaxed. My death was here, and I will accept it. I closed my eyes, waiting for my end. But it never came. I opened my eyes and saw Calixa's cloak shift as if a large gust of wind had struck it. In her hand was the arrow, which she quickly snapped in two. But before I could voice my surprise, a pulse of energy came from her and shot into the sky. A pillar of blood-red light chased away the clouds and the stars. A single ball of crimson flame formed in the sky as the air grew heavier, and another set of text appeared in my vision. The domain god has been attacked. The entrance to the domain has been closed until either the god or the attackers have been slain. The sound of dozens of bells rang out as the moans of the undead came from the forest surrounding us. My eyes, however, were drawn to the word that appeared once more. Was Calixa actually a god? The assassin in the middle drew his sword and made a quick motion for the other two. "Quick, we need to kill Redrick before the rest of the mobs get here." I pressed myself against the wall, trying to make my profile as low as possible. With a blink, the lead assassin jumped forward, bearing his sword. He was fast, almost as fast as me. She was as good as dead. But much to my surprise, she stepped back and grabbed the sword with her metal clad and swung her leg in a tight roundhouse, causing the lead assassin to let go of his sword and jump backward. Dark orange energy radiated off of her in a shimmering haze, which I recognized as being Ki. They were going to have a hell of a time trying to fight her at close range. Ki amplified the body, and high-level Ki users can often fight much higher-level people than themselves, though it was intensive on the body to do so. She grabbed the blade's handle with her other hand and took a guard position as she kept her eyes on her attackers. She was fluid, and from the guard alone, I could tell that she knew how to use a sword, which was uncommon considering that most monks and Ki users shied away from blades. Another arrow was loose in her direction, and the other assassin dived in. She parried the first dagger and twisted her body to dodge the arrow that was coming her way. She was moving and parrying with such liquid efficiency, though she was clearly outmatched. It was amazing that she was holding her own against the three. This dance went on for another minute or so. Calixa was on the defensive as she tried to block and dodge all the attacks, and the hope was slowly fading in my chest once more. She wasn't going to win. It looked like she was doing everything she could to keep the fight going. It was a vicious fight, but in the end, it was still 3 against 1, and I was still too weak to do anything. I stood up and drew my sword. I knew that going out there was dangerous, but I would help her. I limped out of the structure, the handle of my blade clasped firmly in my hand. I activated duelist focus with practiced ease and watched as the fight unfolded, ready to jump into action, at least until I felt a wave of killing intent coming from the forest opposite of us. A wave so intense that my heart skipped a beat. Nausea overtook my stomach once more. Apparently, I wasn't the only one since everyone froze. The intent was tangible, and the message was clear. A pair of golden eyes appeared in the clearing across from us and a voice like that of 1,000 whispers rang out shortly after. "How dare you lay a hand on her?" Here we go, the last chapter of the mass uploads, smiley face. Thank you guys for being so patient with me. I stayed awake for longer than I should have edited all of these chapters for you. Anyways, if you like what you are reading, consider joining my Patreon. My backlogs currently go up to chapter 80 on there with more to come, smiley face. Also let me know what you think so far. Smiley face. The figure stepped into the opening, grasping a large silver halberd in one hand, with the tip pointed towards the ground. She wore a purple uniform, much like the Praetorians that we fought before, but unlike the others, this one had black trimming on the cuffs and sleeves. It was matched with a black cape that billowed violently in the wind, obscuring another silver weapon that hung from her hip. The radiant golden light from her eyes weakened slightly as she stared at us all. Her silver hair floated wildly behind her as it danced in the air. I didn't need to see her name to know who it was. I was staring at Alessia, the captain of the royal guard. She looked as if she was a specter of war, given life once more. Apparently, her appearance must have caught the Empress off guard as well, causing her tempo to lapse for a second. An arrow shot through the air and impacted her shoulder with a meaty thump. At that moment, an ear-splitting cry pierced the air. A cry that seemed to lock every joint in my body in a vice. You have heard the cry of a powerful Ashtel. You have been paralyzed. Apparently, whatever skill she used managed to freeze everyone on the field. I will have your heads for laying a hand on her. Her eyes were wide with anger, and waves of killing intent radiated from around her. In the blink of an eye, she appeared in front of the Empress and grabbed her. She pulled Calixa into her arms, uncaring that this was her chance to attack the assassins. The Empress whispered something quietly, and Alessia focused her gaze on me for a split second before she nodded her head and pulled her over to where I was lying. She carefully helped the Empress down and then bared the tip of the halberd towards my face. You are lucky that you have her favor. However, if you even so much as gaze upon my lady wrong, your head will roll. The threat was obvious and well received, though I had no intention of betraying my savior. Calixa scooted back into the far corner while I still sat there paralyzed. The most that I could do at the moment was just watch. Alessia stepped in front of the door just as the assassins broke through the status effect. The leader looked around and knew that whatever chance they had was now gone, so they did the logical thing and tried to run. There will be no escape for you. The whispers rode the air as Alessia slammed the haft of her halberd into the ground. The forest around us came to life, and dozens of figures appeared from the tree line, all of which were clad in the same purple uniform. One formation used giant round bone shields and marched as one, heading in our direction. Out of habit, I used my analysis skill and saw that the entire group of undead was labeled as hoplites. While I have never heard of the class before, I would assume that it had a heavy focus on unit tactics based on how they moved together. As they crossed the distance between us, even more undead started to appear, boxing us in. Many of the undead that roamed the forest arrived first, and then a lot of the military undead arrived. Far more than I thought existed in this domain. Seeing no way out, the assassins stood back to back with each other, their weapons drawn and at the ready. They were clearly distraught. However, the undead never made a move forward. Instead, they only seemed to want to keep them boxed in. Alessia seemed content to let them struggle with their fear. Were all the bosses in this domain sadist? My paralysis faded, allowing me to move once more, and I cast a glance over to Calixa. She sat in the corner, with the arrow still embedded in her shoulder. The stream of red blood was apparent, along with the fact that she was clearly in pain. Wait, she was in pain. Did that mean she was still alive? Against my better judgment, I moved over to her, though I was sure to keep my distance somewhat. Are you alright? No, this shit fucking hurts. Stupid fucking idiots. She hissed through her teeth, and I couldn't help but laugh. She seemed so human right now and nothing like a god. I opened my mouth to say something, but I was interrupted by the sound of stone getting crushed. I threw my head to the side, and I saw Alessia had 4 large chunks of rock flying up towards her. She spun her halberd gracefully and slammed it into the rocks, sending them hurtling towards her foes. The assassins broke formation, dodging the projectiles. She crouched down and then teleported in front of the closest one, swinging her halberd around with utmost accuracy and grace. Her target danced around her, trying to escape from the damage, but was failing. Every opening was exploited as Alessia tore him apart. I eventually had to turn my attention away from the bloodshed that was happening. Do you need help? I asked as a wave of weakness affected me once more as the poison ran through my veins. No, she replied as she reached up and pulled the arrow from her shoulder. The flow of blood increased slightly, and she hissed in pain as the arrow exited her flesh. I reached down into my bag and pulled out some bandages I kept around for times like this, and tossed them over to her. She eyed them warily before she took them and wrapped them around her shoulder. As she did that, I glanced over to see how the battle was going. The first assassin had been slain and lay to the side in a broken heap. The second impaled to the ground, and Alessia held the third up by the neck. His hood had been cast to the side, and his face was broken beyond any sense of recognition. She stared at him with a face full of scorn as she tossed him to the side. In her hand was a silver mace coated in blood that dripped to the ground. Pathetic, was all she said as she turned and walked towards me once more. She reached out and pulled the halberd from the chest of the other dead assassin, giving it a flick, painting the ground with scarlet ichor. All of a sudden, I was back to being a sheep in a wolf's den, which bothered me. I wasn't weak by any standard, but why was every mob in this domain so fucking strong? I slid back the best that I could as Alessia walked closer before she eventually closed the distance between us. Her ashen skin seemed to glow softly in the moonlight as she stared at me. The golden power behind her eyes dimmed, leaving behind a golden iris that bore into my soul. She stared at me for a moment before she brought her halberd to bear. The spear point rested just a few inches from my face, and I broke out in a cold sweat. Only you are to blame for this. Give me one reason why I should spare your life. Her voice was soft, but the conviction was there. But to be real, there wasn't a reason to spare my life, but that didn't mean that I wanted to die. But as I opened my mouth to speak, Calixa beat me to it. Alessia, that's enough. Her voice was a bit harsh, which caused Alessia to frown as she moved away from me. I released the breath that was caught in my throat and watched as Alessia walked over to Calixa and squatted down. My lady, are you all right? She ran her fingers softly across Calixa's arm as she gazed at her with the utmost worry. A complete reversal of what she was just a few short minutes ago. Yeah, I'll be okay, Calixa replied as she gazed upwards at her for a few seconds before she reached her hand out, and Alessia helped her up. Calixa dusted off her strange cloak and walked over to me, and squatted down. So, how about we retrieve your friends, and we can discuss the terms of our agreement? Promise me you won't hurt them, I told her as I lay there. My health pool was slowly dipping back into critical levels as the poison and darkness gnawed away at me. Another small runic circle appeared below her hand, and another health potion appeared. It must be nice to be able to summon anything you wanted at will. She handed the potion over, but I had to decline it. I knew my body was at its limit for potions, and if I took any more than one, then I risked dying. Though I quickly explained to her why, in part from the fiery gaze that Alessia gave me. The woman was a monster. I see, I understand. Anyway, I promise not to harm any of your friends. Calixa stood up and walked onto the field. The assassins' corpses were still there, though a few of the Praetorians had already looted them and stood at attention, waiting. Karen, would you gather the other three and meet me in Ricard's office, please? From the tree line, I saw the familiar scarlet eyes of the ferryman. Of course, mistress. His voice easily carried across the field before he vanished back into the forest. Calixa stood there with the health potion still in her hand as she swirled the glass tube before she turned away and lifted her mask up. I was curious about what lay behind her mask, but if she was drinking a health potion, she must still be human, right? Once she downed the bottle, she glanced at the container before she dropped it to the ground. Another runic circle appeared and consumed the glass. She reached up and pulled her mask down before turning to face me. Hector, help him up and protect him. There is still one more assassin about. The giant skeleton with the round shield stepped forward and helped me stand up. Bony hands dug into my flesh as I stood on weak legs. I was tentative at first, but she did order them to protect me. How far I have fallen to rely on the undead to keep me alive. I glanced over to my health bar and saw that it was trickling down a bit faster than before. The poison was only building my blood, and from the looks of it, I had a little longer left. But I held my tongue as I followed the undead. The hoplites formed a small wall around me as we marched forward and hit the main road. My legs burned and ached, and the fire that coursed through my veins did little to keep me warm. Eventually, however, my health bar dropped into the double digits, and my legs lost all their strength as I fell forward. The heat coursed through me faded as my heart slowed and my vision blurred. The surrounding hoplites snapped to attention and formed a shield wall around me as one dragged me back behind their lines. My mouth was slowly starting to dry, and all I could do was stare up at the sky. A sky that was alien to me yet seemed all too familiar. Dark clouds moved across it, and the air pressed around me like a warm wet blanket. I could faintly hear the sound of quiet footfalls as someone rushed over to me. A second later, a pair of emerald eyes obscured my vision of the sky and gazed at me filled to the brim with worry, or at least with what I hope was worry. A man could dream, after all. Did you get hit? She asked as she squatted down next to me and tried to pull me up. And no. The poisons are overwhelming my body. It was morose and twisted, but it was true. At this rate, there wasn't anything that could save me. She didn't say anything as she reached down and gave me a pat on my shoulder, and motioned for two zombies nearby to come over. Without sharing a single word, they picked me up by my arms and dragged me carefully down the road. I hung there limply as I watched my health bar tick down. It only seemed to go faster with each blink, while my heart only seemed to beat slower. As it passed the 50s mark, I lost the desire to panic, and instead, I turned inwards as I thought about my life. I was weak. No matter how strong I tried to be, it wasn't enough. I was still that same weak child who couldn't protect himself, his friends, and above all else, his family. The only thing that would welcome me with open arms would be death. Maybe I would get to see my family once more. My health bar dropped past 25. I felt an unfamiliar sensation coil around my heart, and with it, I could hear whispers that slowly entered my mind. calling for vengeance, telling me I should slay everyone that has a hand in my impending death. At first, I rejected the idea. What good would revenge do if I were already dead? My health bar struck 10, and the words grew in intensity, telling me I would live. All I had to do was give in to the rage that I kept buried deep down. Then it hit 9, and the words shifted into a soft whisper, asking me what I wanted to do. But I couldn't remember anymore. What was it that I needed in the first place from here? To restore my honor? On the next tick downwards, the words whispered in my mind, telling me they could help me. They would give me power and strengthen me. At 7, the sweet allure of the words dragged me in. I didn't want to die. I wanted to live and be strong. I couldn't even imagine what Paris would say if I died here. With my health bar now at 6, I succumbed to the promise of the whispers that floated around my mind. However, as I didn't entirely give in to the vengeance that sloshed around my heart. Instead, I accepted it and tried to ride the waves that beat against my soul like a relentless storm. I couldn't succumb to it. I had to stay on top of it. Letting it power me, but not letting it define who I was. A few ticks later, my health bar sat at 1. This was it. This was the moment that I died. I steeled my heart, knowing what was about to come. I was terrified, but whatever presence that lay inside of me gave me some sort of comfort. At least, in the end, I wasn't alone when I died. I closed my eyes, bracing myself for the end, begging any gods that were listening to save me. When I woke up, I was staring at the ceiling. My body ached and burned in dozens of different places, but I was careful not to aggravate any wounds. I slowly sat up, not knowing where I was. My hand dropped to my side, trying to find my blade, and I panicked slightly when I couldn't feel it. I fervently glanced around the room, looking for my sword, and relaxed slightly when I saw it sitting next to me on a small desk. I reached out and pulled it toward my chest. This place has done nothing but remind me of everything I have lost. How weak and powerless I really am. I kept my hand on my sword and looked around the room properly. I sat in what looked like a small living quarter. A small window sat above me, letting in light beams that basked the stone in warm morning rays. A desk stood nearby with a small stack of papers, and in the corner was a woman who had her arms crossed and was staring at me. The mask sent some shivers down my spine as memories came rushing back. I was supposed to have died, but here I was staring at what I believed to be a god. We stood in silence for a moment, as I felt embarrassed. I'd done nothing but embarrass myself for the last few days. I'm sorry, I told her in a hushed whisper. She cocked her head and shrugged. It's not a big deal. I'm just glad to see that you are okay. You had me worried there for a minute. I'm thankful for you saving my life there. I didn't realize that assassins were sent after me. Otherwise, I would have loved to meet you on different terms. I kept my hand on the blade, ready to move at a second notice. I scanned the room around myself looking for Alessia. Something told me she wouldn't be too far from her. I had a feeling that you intended to do so once I saw that you had that stone. Tell me, are those common? She asked as she leaned against a wall. The shadows obscured half of her, though those emerald eyes were still as piercing as ever. No. At least I don't believe so. I've never heard of them until I received this one. I see. Thank you. Anyway, I've heard from your companions that you wanted to talk to me about what my plans are. Ah yes, that. I needed to know so I could report it back to Paris. Everything that has happened lately has been low on my priority list. My mission here was to find out the state of the domain, the mobs, and get a general feel and layout for it. The next part was to figure out if the domain meant any harm to the surrounding area and if we should request its extermination or not. Calixa inhaled deeply through her nose as soon as I talked about extermination. Well, what do you think about it then? Her voice was soft, and I could detect a twinge of sadness in her words and a tiny bit of fear. Well, it's an undead domain, which may frighten people. However, all the undead here seem content to stay and won't affect the outer world. With that being said, how about we both do each other a favor? You have something that I want, and I can put down a glowing report for you. It was risky playing this game, but I needed this domain. Oh? I would help you and ensure your survival. In turn, I need you to help me. I want to rebuild what I've lost. A mutual partnership, some may say. I really hated having to treat my savior like this. It made me feel dirty, but years of playing this game have jaded me. I had to get what I wanted, no matter the cost. She was quiet for a moment before she let out a sigh. Fine. As long as you keep me out of whatever politics you play. Otherwise, the deal is off. I could feel the start of a grin cross my face as the possibility whirled through my mind. Finally, I was getting somewhere. I wanted to get stronger, I wanted my power and resources back, and this was the perfect place to start. The best part is, no one would really mess with her here as long as she stayed under the protection of the Adventurers Guild. She would be risk-free, and it would be me that would be handling everything. You also don't have to worry about Calixa bowing to another master. She's a smart girl who will figure something out that works in her favor. Smiley face. Enjoy. As usual, consider joining my Patreon and my Discord. I love you all and thank you for the support. I stared at the man and bit back my tongue. How dare he pull the savior card to get something he wants. I mentally calmed myself as I started to try and work a plan to try and counter him. Well, you have something that I want as well. I need outside resources and an envoy. If you get me that, then we can talk about your arrangement. The redhead gazed at me. His blue eyes were a little hazy, and his face was still covered in a multitude of cuts that had yet to heal fully. He looked a little perturbed that I had laid a counter-offer at his feet, but he wasn't the only one that needed something. Fine. What do you need? I could feel a grin spreading my lips under my mask. Good, maybe I could still turn this situation back in my favor. Stone, gold, metal, and tools. Whatever you can get your hands on. Why do you need those things? He gazed at me cautiously, though I could understand what he was thinking. Because I want to rebuild. As you can probably gather, a lot has happened in my realm. Though, if you are worried, I'm amassing an attack on the outside world, you don't have to worry. I have no interest in getting dragged into a pointless conflict. Don't get me wrong, I do want to visit the world outside, but at the moment, I need to tread carefully so I can keep the situation under control. Can I have your word on the matter? He asked as he regarded me with his eyes as he scrutinized me, attempting to figure out how serious I was. I suppose. Will a written contract do? I wasn't sure how the world operated outside of here, but if there is magic, there were probably magical contracts or something of the sort. But I didn't have any experience of the sort in that department. So, for the time being, I am content with using good old paper. Written? You don't have magical contracts here? He rose an eyebrow at me, clearly shocked at the fact. But it did serve to further reinforce what I thought. So magical contracts are a thing here. Now, all I had to do was throw something together that would make sense and give me wiggle room on the matter. Here in Asteria, contracts are binding. We don't need magic to enforce them. As long as it is a valid contract, then they can be enforced by the law here. Not quite a lie, but also not the whole truth, since I'm technically the law here. He mused it over before he replied. I can agree with that. Draft me up a contract, and then we can go from there. But on a side note, where are my companions? They are in the safe area, with my troops guarding them. We killed the last assassin just before you woke up. I felt a little numb to their deaths. I realized while I was watching them fight that if I were to worry about every single person who died in here, then I would kill myself with guilt. But they made their choice, and they paid for it with their lives. Not that they are still dead. They ended up joining the ranks of my soldiers as undead assassins, though I was unsure of where their loyalty lies, so they remained locked up, and only Amari deals with them. Thank you for saving them. Words could never express what that means to me. I am forever in your debt. He bowed his head towards me, but really it irritated me. I saved your friends, and this is how you repay me? But I held back the irritation that seemed to swell within me. Of course, I replied, trying to keep my tone even and diplomatic. However, I do ask that you leave now. I have a few things to attend to. But I will send a few of my honor guards with you, just in case there is something that we missed. I still had to take care of some of the stat points I got from the 4 assassins being killed. In fact, I got such a swell in experience that I jumped 10 levels alone from it all, and I was sitting on a class milestone. I'm happy that I got it, but at the same time, I wanted a little more time to jam a few more things in there to maximize my returns, but what can I do? That boat has long since sailed. I motioned for one of the phantoms lurking in the room to show the man the way out. He looked as if he wanted to say something more, but that wasn't important right now. I had to cut the conversation short while I still had the upper hand. He stood up and gave me a nod before he vanished through the doorway, leaving me alone in Ricard's office. I released the deep breath I held and stared out across the courtyard. That was far more intense than I thought it would have been, especially with Alessia's evolution. My eyes wandered over to the notification that appeared a few hours ago. Ashtel, Tyr, a very rare variant of the undead, born of an idea. They are closely related to the Onryo and the Revenant. This creature can alter its body to become incorporeal at will, allowing to flicker in and out of reality as it pleases. The hallmarks of this creature are its extreme regeneration, which overshadows even that of a revenant, and its prowess which is akin to vengeance-driven undead. Alessia was furious when she saw I was taken away. I could feel her rage bubbling in the corner of my mind. So it didn't surprise me when she appeared. What did surprise me was how she killed those assassins without the slightest hesitation. The way she turned off any semblance of emotion as she cut them down. But the second she was finished, she turned back towards me with visible adoration in her eyes. I didn't quite know how to feel about it yet. But it gave me goosebumps to think about. She was a wolf wearing sheep's clothing, yet I knew she would do nothing to hurt me. I ran my fingers across the point where the arrow slammed into me, and I thought about the pain that came along with it. It hurt far more than I thought it would, and it was even worse trying to pull it out. Thankfully, those health potions healed it up quickly. I took a deep breath, walked out of the room, and quietly went down the hallway. A few of the phantoms lurked behind me in the shadows, clearly agitated at what happened yesterday. I don't blame them. I also didn't expect the entire domain to rush to my aid at the drop of a dime. A few shadows danced around me as I walked further through the stronghold. It was a bit empty without Alessia here, but I sent her away to guard the adventurers. Mostly a sign of good faith from me and to get some space to think about things. I knew she hated it, but she wouldn't reject an order. I already sent a missive out with Karen to collect the undead that perished, which sadly was far greater than I initially thought. The assassins picked apart a lot of the feral and a few of the soldiers, though it took them a bit to realize how to do it. Perhaps my undead were a bit too strong for the starting area, but no one ever progressed without trial. I glanced around and motioned for my guard to join me as I started to get my thoughts in order. I still needed to get a contract drafted and think a few things over. Might as well get it over with then, I guess. I teleported out of the stronghold without a second thought, ready to knock out this contract. My class and stat distribution can wait until I finish this. I much rather approach it with a clear head than be burdened by all of this going on. Once I finished the contract, I teleported to the safe area. A large formation of undead was patrolling the area, led by the captain. His cape danced on the wind, and he was clearly agitated. All the undead were. After pushing a few of the phantoms, I saw they felt responsible for me getting attacked. Perhaps I would keep the undead assassins locked up for a while, at least until the tension faded. Strife in my domain wouldn't do after all. As I walked, I ran my fingers across the notebook's cover and thought about the contract that I had written. Essentially, I just wrote that I wouldn't attack the outside as long as I wasn't attacked and left some space in there, so I could continue to try and bring things back into my favor. I would have happily tried to work out a deal that would benefit us both without the extra steps, but this man annoyed me when he pulled that crap earlier. But sadly, we were both in a bad spot. What happened was an eye-opener. If anyone else had a stone like that, then I wouldn't be safe. I needed to train more and be able to defend myself. I was barely holding my own against the 3 assassins, which was by sheer luck. Never again would I allow something like that to happen. Which was why I needed to make this deal as much in my favor as possible, and to ensure that whatever problems this man has, do not become my own. I clenched my gloved hands before reaching up and adjusting my mask a bit. This thing was so light that I forgot it existed. I cleared my throat and stood up straight and walked down the road, flanked by my hoplites, who marched in lockstep with each other. The fog was thinner today. In fact, it was almost non-existent. I was curious about why it was like that, though it may be a question for Karen than anybody else. As I walked closer to the safe zone, I could feel the anxiety creeping into my heart. This was the first time interacting with people outside of that redhead. I would have to make sure I keep my image up. I was an empress, so I needed to act like one. I quickly shoved the feelings down and walked closer to the door. 2 knights stood at the ready with blades in hand, and they gave me a slight bow before the one on the right opened the door for me. Well, it was now or never, I guess. I took a deep breath and strode into the house with my head held high. The soles of my thick boots slammed into the wood, creating a fierce echo that assaulted my eardrums. I needed to set the tone and craft an image of myself. Whatever they thought of me would hang with them a while, and if there was anything that my dad taught me, it was that first impressions were almost impossible to override. Another knight who stood in the hallway gave me a bow and opened the door, and I stepped into the main living area. Alessia stood near a window with her hands crossed behind her back. Her halberd was resting against the wall within her hand's reach, and her hair was down. Her long silvery locks hung down to her shoulders in gentle waves that seemed to sway on the motionless air. She stiffened for a second before she turned around. Her golden eyes met mine, and she gave me a slight bow. "My lady." she whispered quietly. Her eyes looked sad as if she was a puppy that was recently scorned, and I had to suppress a small laugh. It was adorable. Though I had to set a precedent. Alessia, I replied curtly as I walked into the room. Seated on the couch was the redhead. He was passed out and as limp as a doll. Though I didn't blame him, he did have quite the ordeal after all. Across from him was an older gentleman with a shaved head. The way he carried himself told me he was a veteran of some sort. His jaw was clenched, and a vein looked as if it were about to pop. This was going to be a pain in my ass, I could feel it. I walked over to the dining room area and motioned them to follow me in. I quickly cleaned off the table and sat down in the chair at the end of the table. Alessia was close behind me, choosing to stand to my side at the right, while the others came to sit down. At the moment, there was only Gunther and Redrick, while the other two were elsewhere. Not that I was too concerned about it. I placed the paper I had the contract written on the table and slid it over. Here is the contract that we previously discussed. Within it are all the conditions that we talked about. I've slightly amended the contract, to include the fact that adventurers are allowed in. The only thing expressly forbidden is the intent to destroy my realm. Read it and let me know if there is anything that you would like to be changed. Redrick took the paper and looked it over, and Gunther's gaze traveled over to me. His jaw was clenched as he looked me over. What is it you really want? His voice was coarse and gravelly like he smoked a lot. It wasn't really a trait that I noticed when I listened in on their conversations, but that was because I didn't really understand them at first. I want to be left well enough alone and to be able to focus only on this realm. I have no desire to take over the outside world if that is what you are worried about. As I replied, I crossed my arms and settled into my seat. I was heavily thankful for the translation ability I created with my essence points. Otherwise, I would sit here none the wiser. I would have to see if I could imbue this contract with magic after they left, so at least it could be ready by whoever looked at it. Don't you need the bodies of the living to replenish your undead? What about the adventurers that come here and die? What happens to them? He sat forward and interlaced his fingers, talking with a slow and measured cadence. It felt like a storm was brewing, but he was keeping it contained. I would be terrified if it wasn't for Alessia standing behind me. It reminded me too much of my father. I do not need anyone's bodies to create more. As for them, well, it was their choice to come here, and if they died, it was their fault. Though if it appeases you, I will grant them mercy and allow them to rest instead of becoming undead. As bad as it sounded, it was the only way. People would die if they came here. I understood that now, and if I kept rejecting that fact, it would drive me mad. I see. But tell me, what is your purpose? Why do you let the undead roam around if your version of mercy is granting them rest? His gray eyes locked onto me, and his words gnawed at thoughts I have long since locked away. But it made me think, why don't I let them rest? What is my purpose here? Perhaps I should be honest, but I feel like honesty here would only bite me in the ass later, so how about I mix in some honesty with some lies? I thought it over for a moment before I came up with my reply. The undead here are restless because they wish to serve me. When they finally pass, we grant them freedom. Everything they do is by choice and nothing more. I felt a small wave of relief wash over me as I said that. It felt so freeing to voice what I've always thought since it felt so wrong. But now, I have realized just how true those words are to everyone around me. What about your purpose? What drives you here, Empress? His words hung in my head as I thought it over. What does drive me? Is it the desire to go home? Or is it something far more profound than that? To be honest with myself, I was afraid of failure. I didn't want to let anyone down. The shame of that thought alone haunted me, more so now than ever before. Everyone in this domain looks up to me, and I can't stand the thought of being a failure in their eyes. I've been called a failure so many times. I can still hear it in the back of my mind, each word coated with disdain. The reality is, the desire to prove myself is my purpose here. Getting home would just be the consequence. But how could I phrase that in a way that it wouldn't make me sound weak? All my life, I've been called weak. I've been called worthless. But I resent that. The desire to prove them wrong drives me. I wish for nothing more than to see the pride in my parents' eyes. Though it's far too late for that. My mind lingered on the thoughts of my parents. I so desperately wanted to see them proud of me. It's all I've ever wanted. But that was unattainable, more so now than ever. Redrick's eyes glanced from the paper, and towards me, for a second, the emotion in his eyes danced around for a second before it vanished, and he cleared his throat. Anyway, Gunther, enough harassing the lady. Calixa. As he spoke, Alessia cut him off. That's Empress to you. Her words were quiet, yet the whispers filled the room, and so did the lingering threat that her words carried. As much as I knew I should correct her, it felt good seeing him squirm. It gave me a sense of power that I relished. He froze for a moment before he nodded his head. Yes, forgive me. Empress, I agree with this contract. What's the next step to ensuring that it is valid? Now, there are 3 bars on the bottom. We need one witness to prove the validity of the contract, and then for us to each sign it and date it, stating that we agree to the terms. He glanced at the paper and scrunched up his face, and thought it over. It was almost like he was hesitating, but he sighed and muttered something to himself before he spoke again. So be it. Is the date in this realm agreeable? Won't it interfere with the outside world? Shit, I didn't think about that. The contract should technically be valid here, but outside since the world is in a different time zone, judging by what he said. Time to wing it again. While I hold the contract here, it will remain valid, as long as you respect it. It felt like a bit of a cop-out, but it would be for the best. Especially since I didn't plan on venturing out for quite a while. He nodded his head and slid it over to Gunther. The older gentleman scrunched up his eyebrows and started to read it over. I, however, wasn't interested in the silence, so I messed around with my menus. There were still head stat points to distribute. I would not do that here, though, since I didn't know what would happen. But I could still get an idea of what I wanted. At that moment, I knew for sure I wanted to increase my willpower and intelligence. Maybe throw some points into strength and health as well. What I really wanted to see was what I unlocked class and skill-wise, but I was holding off on that since I wanted to put a lot of thought into it. Empress, we both agree to the contract. Redrick's voice tore me from my hazy thoughts. I glanced at them and saw that Redrick had produced a quill with a small ink capsule on end and fiddled with the end before he signed away on the first bar. Then passed it over to Gunther, who did the same. I reached into my pocket, drew my handy pen, took the paper from them, and quickly signed away my name and date. Empress, what is that? Redrick asked as he eyed what I was writing with. This is a pen. It's much like that quill you carry around. I quickly explained as I showed it off. I didn't think it was anything too special. It was just your traditional metal pen, though the only thing fancy about it was the fine tip point. I was a bit OCD about how my handwriting looked, and this pen did wonders in making it better. May I see it? I shrugged and slid it over to him. He took it and marveled at it under the torchlight. It's so light, but how does it work? Won't the ink dry out if you let it sit out at the tip like this? No, you see that button on the top? Just click it, and it retracts the tip. I was so thankful that I was wearing this mask. I didn't want them to know that I was amused by this. The sound of the pen clicking shut filled the room, and they both looked with clearly shaken faces. It took everything I had to suppress a laugh. It was just a pen. How much did it cost to make something like this? The craftsmanship is superb. The way the metal bends around itself is amazing. Including the fact that the ink is self-contained and can be used with such a simple click. As he said that, something clicked in the back of my mind, and before I knew it, money signs passed through my mind. Well, the price is irrelevant. However, if you want, we can add a trade deal into the mix. Sweetness dripped from my words like honey as the two made eye contact as the gravity of what I just said hit them. It didn't take them long to understand what I was getting at. I think we can work something out, Empress. What do you have in mind? Redrick as he sat forward and interlaced his fingers. He seemed ever more interested than Gunther did. He was probably someone of affluence, which was good. I could establish myself as something more than just a place where people come and die. I can be a trade power, on top of just a regular domain. Hell, I can create things with a thought, so as long as I have resources, the sky is the limit. I could feel a grin creeping across my face as I had already planned out exactly what I wanted to do. We can open up trade. The only thing that it would cost you is increased resources and some gold. Other than that, it's up to you, I told him with a shrug. It's not like I really needed money. I could create it out of thin air. I figured it would be a good show of faith and hopefully remind him in the future that he shouldn't treat me like shit. So I would forgive it this time. His eyes lit up as he worked through something. That sounds reasonable. I will manage all trade deals at your behest, and I'll send some profits your way. Would you like to make another contract on the matter? Yeah. I'll have it written up. It will be presented to you tomorrow, along with your first shipment. The gears in my head turned as I thought about what I could make. The best part is that I would still be a neutral figure. I have no desire to join whatever quarrels exist outside of this world. So this would be the best way to do it. I would only interact with the outside world through him. Thank you so much, Empress. He seemed much happier than last time, like I lifted an enormous weight from his chest with that idea. You are welcome. Anyway, I'm afraid I must cut this meeting short. I have things I need to do. I took the contract and brought it over to me. While I'm still coming out strong, I should probably end the meeting, lest I get dragged into something that I didn't like or lose my advantage so far. Redrick looked a bit stunned at my sudden dismissal. So soon? I know that some of my companions did wish to speak to you. Oh, I really didn't want to get dragged into anything else. I just wanted to relax and upgrade my class. I will get with them at a later date. Tell them to drop by later and talk to Karen about setting up an appointment with me. He shared a glance with Gunther before he shifted his head back to me. I understand. We thank you for the time that you have given us. I waved my hand dismissively as I stood up and grabbed the contract. Anyway, I will take this with me. I'll have a copy made of this, and it will be delivered to you first thing. Moving forward, Karen will be my intermediary, so please forward any questions that you may have to him. Redrick strummed his fingers across the table and looked like he wanted to say more, but he stopped himself. Thank you, Empress. Hopefully, we meet again. Perhaps. Stay safe, Redrick. Gunther, you as well. I gave them a curt nod and gestured for Alessia to follow me. The quicker that I got out of here, the better. I was happy and excited that I got to speak to humans for the first time in a while, but yet, it felt so different. In a way, it felt like it fell flat against what I was expecting. They regarded me as if I wasn't like them. Like I was some kind of monster. I sighed and left the cabin with Alessia in tow. I wasn't as bothered with her as before since I had come to terms with what had happened. She walked silently behind me as we made our way down the path and out of the sight of the others before I teleported back to my office space. Once I had appeared in there, I stumbled over to the chair and sat down. The stress left my body, and I closed my eyes. Dealing with them was stressful. The amount of acting that I had to do was insane, and it gave me a headache to boot. This sucked. I opened my eyes and stared at the ceiling as I tried to de-stress a bit, but there was a feeling that kept me distracted. The feeling of someone's eyes boring into me. I shifted my head slightly and met Alessia's burning gold orbs. Yes? Are you mad at me? She asked as she tilted her head and crossed her arms. There she was again with that kicked puppy look on her face. No, I'm not mad at you, I told her as I sat up straight and looked at the papers on my desk. Do you promise? I paused, taken aback. It amazes me how much a person like her could change personalities. One moment, she could be the coldest person I have ever met, and then the next, she could be unsure of herself. Yes, Alessia, I promise I'm not angry with you. I motioned for the chair I made for her and turned my attention back to my menu. I was inquisitive about the stuff that I unlocked. Congratulations! You have reached your first class milestone. Please select one of the following classes. Martial Soul, rare. You have spent countless hours working on your proficiencies. You have begun your path with Ki and your soul. War drives every action that you take and flows through your veins. The longer that you remain in battle, the stronger you become. This class is a hybrid between a tank and DPS. Soul Monk, rare. You walk the dual path of soul and body. Each strike you deliver is laced with an unimaginable force that sunders armor and assault the very core of those who stand before you. Though all-out offense is not your only option. With the power of your soul, you are able to defend those who can't defend themselves. This class is a hybrid of support and DPS. Astarian Weapons Master, unique. You have taken countless hours of training with an undead war maiden, a monk, and a blade master. Through hard work and relentless training, you have learned how to wield various weapons and find using them a solstice. This class is a hybrid of tank and DPS. Storm Monk, uncommon lightning courses through your veins, pushing you to unimaginable speeds and striking with tremendous force. Though at the cost of your defense. You become the storm you so desperately try to emulate. This class is purely offensive, with very little in the way of defense. Dragon of Asteria, unique. The soul and ki of a long-dead dragon mingle with your own. Its power enhancing you and fortifies your body. You walk a path that very few others have, but you do so brazenly. Much like the dragon that now dwells within your soul, you fight valiantly to protect your own. But at what cost? This class is a hybrid class. I read down the list, and I felt my jaw drop as I read the options. Not a single skill below uncommon appeared, and definitively not one that included mana. Wow, I need to take a second and carefully pick which one I want. But to do so, I had to balance all the pros and cons of each one. Starting with the first option, the Martial Soul. While the system didn't really detail the specifics of the class, I understood the general gist of the description. It was a class focused on sitting on the front lines and fighting. As much as I enjoyed the idea of the class, since it would give me DPS and tank abilities, I didn't want to risk it. Fighting up front seemed like it put a lot of risk on me, and I would much rather not do something that would get me killed if I could help it. Primarily since everyone here is relying on me. I dismissed the idea and checked the second one with that thought in mind. The Soul Monk looked like it was a hell of a lot of fun. I mean, who didn't want to be a monk and fuck shit up? Plus, it lets me use my soul skills more freely and doesn't require me to stay in battle for extended periods. I kept that one in mind as I moved further down the list. This next one was the Asterian Weapons Master. This was odd to see as a class, considering that Asteria was unique. But that would explain the unique modifier next to it. Let's see, it was essentially a conglomeration of all the proficiencies that I knew and used, so it wasn't a terrible option by any stretch, and it was a hybrid class to boot. So I would consider that one next. As I read over Storm Monk, it looked like it would be a good time, but I dismissed it. I couldn't justify not having any sort of defense, especially after watching the adventurers fight. It would be too big of a risk for me. I could slip up, and it would spell my doom. Which was sad, but I had to place my well-being above all else. Now on to the last option. Dragon of Asteria, eh? It looks like a really excellent class, and it would pair well with my soul skills, which I am ashamed to say I haven't leveled recently. The best part of it is that it would offer me a pure hybrid class, which is what I am into, anyway. I bit my lip as I read over everything carefully. More than anything, I was torn between the Soul Monk and the Dragon class. I wouldn't hurt too badly if I skipped the Weapons Master one since I would keep those proficiencies. But at the end of the day, I didn't need it. They were there more for backup than anything. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that the Soul Monk would not be the path that I take. The reason is that I feel like it would limit me, and that wouldn't be something that I wanted. So with my mind made up I selected Dragon of Asteria. Congratulations! You have selected the Dragon of Asteria class. You have earned +5 stat points. You have earned +2 willpower. You have earned +2 intelligence. You have earned +2 strength. You have earned +1 conversion point. You have unlocked Draconic Constitution, your health, stamina now have increased regeneration, and your body grows in strength. You have gained Draconic Key, your key has been upgraded. You have unlocked the following skills. Basic Draconic Soul Shout I, using the power of your soul, you can send out a blast in the shape of a cone. Basic Draconic Presence I, the power contained within you radiates outwards and instills fear in those who stand before you. I felt my body grow stronger as the class change took effect. It felt much like when I upgraded my Ki core, but it was much more potent this time than before. I could feel a laugh build up in my chest before it exploded outwards as the feeling became all the more intoxicating. Oh, I was going to have fun with this. I stood in the abandoned mine, ready and eager to test out my new skills. The adventurers were still concentrated around the safe zone, so I wasn't worried about getting discovered. However, I still brought along a few of my Praetorians just in case something happened, which knowing my luck, was almost a guarantee. I made Alessia stand a little ways behind me since I didn't want her to get hurt in the process of me learning how to use this skill. I cleared my throat and stared at a pile of discarded rocks that looked to be far too heavy for me to move on my own. Now, how was I going to do this? I shifted uncomfortably on my feet as I tried to steady myself. I called on the skill mentally, and I could see faint wisps of whitish-blue energy as they coalesced around my mouth and folded themselves into the shape of a needle. For a few tense moments, the energy kept forming from the air. The power behind it threatened to slip from my control, but I held on for dear life. More and more energy materialized from the air as it rushed towards me, and as soon as it felt like I was about to lose control, I directed the power outwards. A strange roar escaped from my lips as the power rushed out in a blinding white cone in an incredible surge of energy and smashed into the pile of rocks, pushing them to the side as if they weighed no more than a piece of paper. For a split second, I was happy with the skill, at least until my world began to spin. I closed my eyes, fully expecting to smash into the ground below. But I never felt it. Instead, I felt a pair of cool arms wrap around my waist, keeping me from falling. "Worry not, my lady." Alessia's voice echoed in my ear as she helped me steady myself. Though the touch was a bit unexpected, and my heart jumped a bit, though I was more apt to pass it off due to using the skill. At least, that's what I'm going to tell myself. "Thank you, Alessia," I murmured as another wave of weakness struck my body. Using that skill cost many of my overall resources and left me feeling empty. It was an exhaustion that seemed to eat at me at a far deeper level than anything I had ever experienced before in my life. Not even the long hours that I used to pull at work could compare. I took a ragged breath as Alessia, and I walked over to a boulder, helping me sit down. My eyelids grew heavy, but I fought back the exhaustion that seemed to corrode me from the inside. I needed to stay awake. I had to do things, but I was just so tired. Instead of sleeping, I sat there and watched my soul bar tick up, and with each tick, it chased away the exhaustion. I focused on the bar, ebbing between being fully aware and partially comatose. Time felt like it ticked by slowly, as I was lost in my mind. Slowly but surely, I felt the strength return to me, and I could finally move again. I sat up and stared at the barren stone ground. My mind still felt a little hazy, and it was hard to focus on anything of use. A part of me just wanted to curl up and sleep, but I had stuff that I needed to do. I stood up, fully aware that I was operating on autopilot, and motioned for Alessia to join me as I prepared to teleport back to my office with a quick gesture. I still needed to select my new skills, but those could wait until I finished what I needed to do and get some rest. I didn't want to make choices on a tired mind. As soon as my world settled down, I walked over to my desk and sat down. Usually, I would put a lot of thought into what I wanted to make, but I didn't care at this point. I just wanted to make enough product to give to that damned adventurer to start having a flow of resources coming in. If I had a massive surplus, I wouldn't care about doing something like this, but my hands were tied on the matter. There was also the matter of essence, which I needed to progress. Considering this trade deal I made, I should avoid spending more essence than I needed to. Ugh, I hated them all. Why did this happen to me? I quickly disassembled my pen and consumed each separate part. Once I was finished, I decided to recreate 51 of them for now and take one from the stack for myself. While that was going, I created a small crate to store them all in. While the familiar motes of blue light rained from the ceiling and slowly formed the items, I decided it was time to finally sleep. Alessia, in a little while, would you mind storing the pens in that crate and delivering them to those adventurers, please? I asked as I stumbled over to my bed. I suppose I could. I hummed out an agreement as I crawled under my blankets and buried my face in the pillow, and wrapped myself up. It's been so long since I last slept. Oh, how I've missed my bed so. I laid there for a moment, relishing the comfort and softness before sleep claimed me and dragged me into its loving embrace. When I awoke, I saw that almost 6 hours had passed, and I finally felt somewhat normal again. My head had cleared a bit, and the exhaustion that had plagued my being seemed to have faded away. I looked around the office and saw that the crate was missing. Ah, good, I'm glad to see that she did it. For a few more seconds longer, I enjoyed the warmth from my blanket and the softness of my bed. A large part of me didn't want to leave it, but I knew I had to. There was far too much for me to do. So I stood up and moved over to my desk, curious about the new skills that I unlocked along with my class milestone. Congratulations! You have reached your first class milestone. Please select which branch you wish to specialize in. DPS, Tank, Healing, Support, Hybrid. I looked at the new list and thought it over. I already had specialized in Hybrid the first time, so it's a matter of figuring out what I needed next. With that thought in mind, I crossed out Hybrid. Not that I didn't want it, it was just a matter of specializing now. But what did I need right now more than anything? That fight with the assassins did wonders to open my eyes to what I lacked. The only thing that kept me going was my constant key expenditure, but that wasn't enough even then. So, for now, I think I will go with the healing. The sustain would be critical for my success after all. I confirmed the choice, and my screen flickered before it brought up a list of skills that I could choose. Analyzing skills, traits, and titles. Please select up to 6 skills. Soul Flame, using a portion of your soul, you can ignite a flame that can be quenched by neither water nor magic. Anima Lightning, the power within you ripples like lightning and can inflict paralysis and sustain damage. Resplendent Remedy, using a part of your soul, you can restore your body to its previous splendor. Dragon's Skin, the strength of the dragons flows through you, hardening your flesh and increasing your vitality and overall defense. Mending Soul, this skill will help you stave off some damage recently taken. Rending Claw, your ki and soul infuse your claws, allowing them to rend apart flesh and armor as if they were paper. Double Strike, with your martial ability at hand, you are able to swing your melee weapons at impossible speeds, striking the same target twice faster than the eye can see. Harrowing Gaze, the power that brims within you explodes outwards, fearing all who gaze upon you. Soul Barrier, you can create a shield that will absorb all incoming damage. Deafening Roar, you release a roar that draws attention to yourself. Double Shot, you can now notch 2 arrows instead of 1 and accurately fire them. Cataclysm, the power of your soul runs rampant, exploding outwards, knocking back everyone around you, dealing heavy damage. I read all the options, and I was floored by the skills that I saw. My mouth was even beginning to water slightly. These all looked so good, so why could I only pick 6? This wasn't fair, I wanted them all. I glared at the screen as I looked it over and saw some older skills that I looked over last time. I wasn't sure how the whole skill system worked, considering that I skipped 9 levels off that massive level up, but I would take what I could get at the moment. So what did I want to use in the future? For starters, I went with Soul Flame to have a steady DPS skill and then regarded the rest of my options. The 2 healing skills I saw both looked good, but something told me that the Resplendent Remedy would be the best of the 2 options, though I needed to expand on the use of my soul if I wanted to use it well enough. Once I confirmed that choice, I still had 4 skills I could choose. Dragon Skin looks like it would be suitable for self-sustaining, so it would be a good pick without a doubt. Now I had 3 skills left. I picked up 1 damage skill, 1 healing, and 1 self-buff, so what did I want now? I carefully looked over the skills one last time and picked Rending Claw. It should synergize well with my claw template and provide me with a close-range skill. The Soul Barrier looked as if it would be suitable for negating a lot of damage coming my way, but since my body had a heavy focus on speed to avoid damage, it felt lackluster. I mean, they can't hurt me if they can't catch me after all. The following skill was Deafening Roar wasn't my quiet thing either since I didn't want to draw attention to myself in a fight. More than likely, it would only bite me in the ass in the future. As for the other skills, I could use Double Strike and merge it with Rending Claw, so it was something to consider. What had my attention, though, was Cataclysm and Harrowing Gaze. I could use one for disengage, while the other could use it to stop a fight from happening. I thought it over before I selected those 2 and confirmed all of my choices. Double Strike seemed terrific and all, but I needed high-impact skills. However, if I saw it on my next level up, I would take it. As for the other, well, I didn't intend on using a bow that much. As my finger left the screen, a piercing headache overtook me as vague bits of details entered my mind on how to use those skills. I clasped my head as the pain racked me for quite some time before it faded away, leaving me with only the barest hints of knowledge on how to use my newly acquired skills. Once the pain had faded, I stood up and teleported over to the training area. My domain was still empty, and I saw the adventurers were gone. Good riddance, then. I turned towards some of the target dummies and quickly looked through my skills. So Harrowing Gaze wouldn't be good to use here since it would affect living entities. However, I could still practice the other skills. First off, I activated Dragon's Flesh, and a strange sensation covered my skin. It felt as if it was being stretched out by some unseen machine. The top layer darkened slightly and dried out. Cracks formed across the surface, at regular intervals seeming imitating scales. I ran my fingers across it, and it felt a bit like dried leather, but there were tiny bits of metal that faintly glittered in dying sunlight. I glanced at my medium-clad hand and saw that the skill seemed to blend in with my medium. Out of a morbid sense of curiosity, I created a new chef's knife and ran it across the palm of my hand. The tip of the knife only scratched the surface of my skin, but nothing more. I didn't really press all that hard. But it was good. At least I had some survivability in a fight. The upside was that this skill wasn't a constant resource drain. Which was odd. I may have to consult with Karen to figure out what was going on. I kept the skin on and tested my next skill. I summoned my weapon template and 5 long reptilian-like claws extended from my fingertips. The back of my hand took on a gauntlet-like appearance. As if I had stuck my hand into a giant glove. Overall the hand was large and covered in etheric scales. The claws themselves were an easy 15 centimeters and came to a triangular shape near the top. The thought of these hitting somebody made me shiver slightly. There was no telling how much damage these bad boys would do if I could get my hands on someone. I kept the claws out and spun around. For some reason, all of this felt so right. I stopped, looked through my skill catalog, and tested out Soul Flame next. I kept my claws active as I summoned the flame forth. In the center of my palm, a radiant violet flame appeared laced with white flickered into existence. I marveled at the flame, especially since its radiated heat didn't seem to bother my skin. Instead, it gnawed away at me from the inside. A bit like a fire that burned underneath my skin. I pointed it outwards and sent my soul forth, and the fire shot forward and slammed into the training dummy, though much to my dismay, it didn't leave any visible marking. I guess this was another one of those skills meant for living targets. I dismissed the skill and quickly brought up the next with a quick motion. My claws shifted as a strange fire spread across their surface. The flames didn't have much of a specific color, other than the noticeable color of ki, mingling with that of my soul. It radiated a strange power that gnawed at my mind. But I ignored that feeling and stepped forward to the practice dummy and took a test swing. The air screamed out as if the claws were rending reality itself and tore through the wood as if it didn't exist. As my claws left the body of the training dummy, small gouts of flame erupted from the air, further consuming my target. I pulled my hand back and stared at it in wonder. This was so fucking cool. I chuckled as I dismissed the skill and then focused on my next one. Which was Cataclysm, though a part of me was slightly worried about the after effects, but I wouldn't know what they were until I tried it. I took a deep breath and consulted my knowledge on using the skill. The energy concentrated in my chest like a storm. The surrounding area dimmed as light rushed toward me. Tiny tendrils of lightning split the air around me as the power built up. My soul bar quickly drained, but I stopped it as soon as it reached half. In the blink of an eye, an explosion blinded me as my soul shot outwards in every direction, tearing up the ground and destroying a solid 4 meters around me in all directions. A wave of weakness crashed into my body, and I fell to my knees. It wasn't nearly as strong as when I used my soul shout, but it was still pretty powerful. I glanced at my resource bar and saw that it had dipped a little lower than half. I really needed to practice getting this stuff leveled up. At least I have levels now that I can offset my resource costs. I stood up and brushed down my cloak, and brushed back my hair. It was time to get to work on leveling everything while I had the chance before the next batch of adventures got here. I cracked my fingers and mentally prepared myself for what was to come. Gotta get that grind on. I stumbled into my office, my mind weary and my muscles sore. I pushed myself to my absolute limit, trying to get these skills to a good place. They all increased in 1 rank overall, which wasn't bad, but I wasn't about to mess with my soul bar right now. That would only lead to a massive headache later, and that wasn't something that I was too keen on dealing with. I already felt like shit as it was, and I wasn't going to push past that point. I threw myself onto my bed and saw that Alessia had returned and was sitting in the corner reading something. "What is that?" I asked, more out of trying to start a conversation than anything else. "A book," she replied as she flipped through to another page. I narrowed my eyes at her and threw a pillow. "No shit. What book is it?" The pillow went right through her, and she tore her gaze from it and towards me. A flicker of amusement danced through her eyes as she regarded me. "It's a novel one of the adventurers gave me before they left. It's a romance book. The name is 20 Shades of Black." I froze when I heard the name, utterly aware of what that book was, even if I hadn't read it. Or at least, I could infer what it was. "Oh, I see, well, have fun with that." I shrugged as I climbed into my bed. I didn't mind her reading that, besides, it's not like I'm her mother, but it makes me feel weird knowing she's reading that kind of stuff. My head hit the pillow, and I pondered some other things. The first adventurers that came here were unique, to say the least. They seemed ill-equipped to be here and struggled a bit, but I think I would let them bash themselves against my undead for a while longer before I decided to change around the Legion. Whatever gave me essence, really. As that thought crossed my mind, it dawned on me that I hadn't checked my pool or the traits that I have. I've been a little busy with everything. I made a quick gesture, opened up my menu, and looked through everything. Each of those 4 assassins yields 4,000 essence per, which gave me almost 16,000. Total, I had 21,000 and then some change. So I needed 4 more thousand to hit my cap. From there, I had no idea what to do, so I would get with Karen on the matter. I dismissed it and glanced at my domain traits. Unified faith, the undead within your domain serve you wholeheartedly. Each action you take affects them and defines who they are. You are the beacon that guides them through the uncertainty of their lives. Because of the psychic connection that the undead share, their memories are changed free of cost. Ideas can be implemented and created without an issue. Whispers of a dead empire, with such potent faith, the undead warp the domain with their thoughts. Whispers of what once was, and what will be now permeate the air. Be wary, for this effect can lay low even the strongest of wills. Corrupted past, due to the nature of the domain, the entities here have a false idea of what they once were. Therefore, they can achieve concepts with no prior knowledge. I bobbed my head as I read them over. Not a bad collection of traits. Everything looked pretty simple and straightforward. The only thing that I needed to do now kept molding my undead to what I wanted them to be. I still felt a little bad at the fact that I was slowly grinding away their memories, but the more I thought about it, the less bothered I was. It was just something that had to be done. I dismissed my screen and stared up at my ceiling. This wasn't so bad. All I had to do was get over some reservations I had. Now it was just a matter of achieving my goal here. But the whispers part was interesting. I haven't noticed anything that seemed off. Perhaps that should be a Karen question. If I remember, of course. As I was working through some ideas, my mind flittered back to Alessia's evolution. It said she had become sentient, so I was curious about what that meant for me. I reopened my menu and looked through everything to see if I could find more information. Sentient undead. These undead have been awakened and are entirely aware of who they are. They are powerful, intelligent, and, above all, dangerous foes. However, this comes with a major drawback. Outside of your system companion, sentient undead cannot be respawned. Once they are vanquished, they are forever so. As I read it over, my blood ran cold, and I gazed at Alessia. If she died, I couldn't respawn her. I had to keep her alive, or at least close by. All the others that would perish here, at least I could bring them back. But not Alessia. I frowned, but I didn't voice my concern about it. I had some amount of trust in her to not do something as stupid as to kill herself. Oh, Karen, I didn't expect to see you. I sat back in my chair and set down my pen, and pushed some of the papers that I was working on to the side. I figured I should drop by and check on you. It's been a little while since we last spoke. Karen walked into my office and sat down in the chair across from me. His robe bunched up slightly across his legs, and his scarlet eyes bore into me. That's true. How are you doing? Ah, how sweet of him to think about me. In all honesty, though, we haven't really spoken in a while, but work is work, and it's bound to happen. As well as I could be, I suppose. I really dropped by because I wanted to talk about the increase in essence and what the next steps for this domain are going to be. He crossed his arms, and his eyes dimmed slightly. Ah yes, I almost forgot about that. I got caught up in planning out the next expansion for the domain. I was actually going to ask about that. What happens at the next tier, and how do I get to it? The next tier of the domain will allow you to build past T2 mobs and will cut your essence costs down. As for your next question, you just have to expand the menu and click on the upgrade option once you cap out. It's really quite simple. When he said that I felt a little stupid after everything I had been through, I really thought there was something elaborate behind that. But at least it was something simple. Thank you, Karen. On a different topic, what do you think of the domain so far? I asked as I reached out and grabbed a new sheet of paper, and quickly prepared to take some notes. It's not bad. It shouldn't be too much as long as the parties are diverse enough to handle the mobs. But gauging from the party that was recently in here, then most would probably get slaughtered if they don't tread carefully, which isn't a bad thing. This is a domain after all, so the difficulty has to be much higher than that of a dungeon. I nodded my head as I quickly jotted down what he was saying. I was glad that I didn't have to restructure. Hopefully, the parties that visited here were diverse enough to handle themselves. I was also happy that the following domain level would allow me to create higher tier mobs. Don't get me wrong, I'm happy with what I have, but at the same time, some more variety wouldn't hurt anything. I understand. I think I will leave everything as is for now. Currently, however, I am working on an additional part of the domain for my first major expansion. I slid the paper over to him, which had a skillfully drawn forest with a road and a small river that led to the lake. The forest traveled out about 4 more kilometers and encircled a small area that I marked out as a town with branching roads that went out in all directions. The issue that I was running into was the locality of the domain, which was somewhat mind-boggling to consider. My domain currently was a sphere that totaled almost 9 kilometers from point to point. With that being said, a spherical expansion inside would shift everything outwards while maintaining that same 4.5 kilometer radius and preserving the land size. My mind almost couldn't comprehend that fact. It was all so much to take in. But, I started to realize I wasn't entirely human anymore, so things like this were going to be commonplace. Maybe I should make a map to keep better track of everything. As Karen looked over my drawing, I looked through my inventory and tallied up all the resources I had at hand. I still had a fair bit of stone and steel left. I had a surplus of wood, which sadly would dwindle once I had this town made. My notebook made its way back into my hand as I jotted everything down and did the math in my head for what was to come. I like the idea so far. There are a few things, though, that I have questions about. The first is resources, aren't we low on them? The next is, how do you plan on allowing adventurers to traverse the size? If it's too large, then they will refuse to do so. He set the piece of paper down and slid it over to me, which I took and put in my notebook. Well, for the resources, I struck a trade deal with the adventurers. For two reasons. The first is that I need a steady supply of resources. If I can make them something simple that doesn't cost me much, I profit on resources that flow back. The second reason is a bit more complicated. I saw how they reacted to the undead, and it made me worry about my place here on this planet. I figured that people would be less likely to attack me if I did this trade deal. Money talks where I come from, and hopefully that holds true here too. I interlaced my fingers as I leaned forward and stared at my companion's face. He bobbed his head and chattered his teeth for a moment as he thought it over. That was actually an incredibly smart move on your end. You are putting yourself in a position where it would be more harmful than beneficial to attack you directly. Are you sure that you can trust those adventurers on the matter, though? What if they try to take advantage of you? His hand moved to his chin, and I could almost see the gears turning in his head at this new information. Mine was turning, too, as I realized the severity of what I had done. At first, it was a spur-of-the-moment idea, yet I still didn't quite think everything through. Highly unlikely. I stand to lose very little. Anything I make for them doesn't cost me much as long as I have the resources, and I told him I wanted no part of whatever drama knowing him entails. It's a strict business relationship as far as I am concerned and nothing more. I crossed my arms and sat back, taking a deep breath in. This stress of figuring out what to do for resources was slightly lessened. At least for now, I may have to figure out what else I can make to expand on that trade deal. I had full intentions of creating a royal capital at some point, and I felt that it would make a fortune and a half to make sure I had enough of everything. Well, that's good. As long as they don't use another one of those stones, we should be able to handle any sort of siege if people try to attack us for being undead. The longer we stay alive, the higher the chances are of us being able to repel it. That was also true. However, I wasn't scared anymore. The only way that we would get out of this is together, and if I hesitated, we would all suffer. I know. Ricard is busy training the new generation of recruits that I created for him to bolster our strength. The veterans who survived the fights with those assassins prove useful in teaching everyone. Seeing how they can learn and put new skills to use, I'm going to pull them out and move them further into the domain at some point. Resources like them are going to be invaluable in the future. Be sure to leave a few around to be challenges for the adventurers. You did set up respawn timers for the undead, right? Yep. Though I was trying to figure out a way to pass messages to each other, outside of using the bells and psychic communication. I wanted something that was discreet and would let the commanders pass information around to each other as needed, mostly to add some depth to the domain, but I wasn't too sure on what to do yet. That was an issue that was gnawing at me. On Earth, we had radios, cell phones, and the internet. Being able to communicate at enormous distances wasn't an issue there, but I had no clue how to make that stuff here. Why don't you use some of those undead templates that you have? You can use carrier pigeons, or even the Lionel and Wolf to send messages to people. His eyes brightened a bit as he focused on me. I wanted to slap myself in the face as I realized that. I was overthinking things again. Actually, thank you. I didn't even consider those things. Would you like to accompany me to the surface to see what the templates do so we can make the best choice? When we appeared topside, it was at the old Royal Guard training area that was now fully underground. Honestly, at this point, I've taken this place over as my own testing area, which sadly had to come to an end once the adventurers came here en masse. I quickly opened up my inventory and started to work my way down from the top of the list. The familiar runic circle opened up, and a pigeon popped into existence. At least, what looked like one. Its feathers were the color of fresh dirt, and part of its ribcage was visible to the night sky. Its milky white eyes fixed on me, and it made more a croak than a chirp. I commanded it to fly, and it flapped its wings and flew around my head twice before landing on my shoulder. While I was partially grossed out by that, I chose not to say anything. I glanced back at the list and saw that the wolves were next on the list. I clicked on it and decided to only spawn one for now, though I would spawn more later to fill the forest. A paw reached out from the ground, and then a second one. A scarred snout popped up next, which was dripping fresh blood. I could hear the sound of paws scrambling as the wolf was doing its best to climb from whatever hole it was coming from. It took a bit, but finally, it managed it. The wolf's fur was gray and looked a little sickly. Its teeth were blackened, and bits of fresh flesh hung precariously from its mouth, dripping flesh blood. I would peg it close to the size of an average wolf, all things considered. It stared at me for a second before it sat back on its haunches like a dog and tilted its head. Ah, it was just like a dog, albeit a very dead one. I may have to keep this one for myself. I snapped my fingers and pointed to the spot behind me. Thankfully, it didn't even think to defy me. Ah, yes, I will for sure be keeping this one. Anyways, I have one last template I want to see, and I honestly didn't even know what this one was. I selected the template named Lionel, and a large rune appeared as a set of antlers rose. Ah, I knew what those things were. I saw them across the lake from me when I first got here. They looked a lot like deer, at least from a distance I saw them. But we will see what they look like up close. I cleared my throat and glanced at my new dog, Wolf. I never had one as a child since my parents didn't think I was responsible enough. To be fair, looking back, I probably wasn't. A lot of vet bills, food, and walking the creature, which was something that I don't think I would have been too fond of doing. But now, I don't have to worry about stuff like that. I mean, it's undead, so vet bills are out of the question. It doesn't need food as far as I know, and the best part is, I don't have to walk it. I turned my attention back to the summoning circle and saw a giant stag-looking creature. Its flesh was broken and leaking copious amounts of purposes and liquid. Its massive antlers were covered in dried flesh, and blood leaked from a broken jaw. The massive creature snorted and kicked its hoofs into the ground as it stared at me, waiting for an order. Well, more than likely, I would use the pigeon for now, at least until I could figure out another replacement, but I think this domain was missing some ambient wildlife, so I would have to add some of that stuff in. With my mind made up and after a brief discussion with Karen, I went ahead and started to spawn in large quantities of wildlife to fill the forest since having nothing but undead humans felt a little lacking. As soon as I expanded my domain a bit, I would do more since I didn't want to overpopulate the area. Once I was done spawning in creatures, I must have had close to 30 undead pigeons, 11 wolves, and 5 of my totally not deer creatures. I crossed my arms as I looked over the area, pulled about 10 of the pigeons to me, and told them they needed to visit all the outposts and the central stronghold. As the birds flew away, I quickly sent a message to Ricard and Flint, informing them what I wanted to occur. Once I was done, I released my pint of breath and rolled my shoulders. This was stressful as shit. But, this was the path that I took, so I had to deal with it. I stretched and motioned for my new pet to follow me. Karen had already left to go. Man, the trenches since we saw a few adventurers had already trickled in. I was excited now to see how many adventurers would handle themselves here, along with my undead. I also couldn't wait to see what undead evolutions would occur here in the future now that things could flow more smoothly, but I would cross that road when I got there. For now, though, I need to get back to my office, work on my expansion plans, and get ready for my domain evolution. I placed my hand on the wolf's shoulder and teleported back into my office. When I appeared, it was in the main lobby. Many of the royal guards here were running drills with each other unendingly. I swore they were growing all the smarter with every passing day, and it was refreshing. Amari was becoming more and more dangerous, and the 4 assassins that had joined my ranks had really bolstered the strength of my assassination division. Well, when I say division, I really only mean 8 of them. On my next expansion, I would attempt to double that number. Once that was done, I would have a team of killers that could roam the domain and pose challenges to all the adventurers. The longer they stayed alive, the less likely I would be to let them remain out and about. Experience is valuable, after all. I walked through the main lobby and towards my office. I had an idea that I wanted to flesh out, which may benefit us in the future with evolutions. My idea was based on the Colosseum from Rome and would serve as an area for the undead to gather and fight each other to the death, and grow stronger. One day, I had plans to move it to the surface and let everyone use it. But for now, it will remain underground for us to use. Perhaps I could host war games here and let the veterans train the new recruits. That way, I could keep them safe while pumping out legions without a worry. I sat down at my desk, quickly grabbed my notebook, and flipped it open. I was quickly running out of space with all of my notes and drawings. Perhaps next, I should make a few more in a couple of hours. I grabbed my pen and quickly got to work mapping out the design for my Colosseum. I sat back in my chair and rubbed my eyes, and stared at my ceiling. Designing that thing took so much time, and it made my head hurt a bit, but I think I was happy with the results so far. To scale, it was double the size of the one on Earth. I thoroughly planned on giving it a seating capacity of close to 100,000, though it wasn't specific. But for now, I will keep it small since I don't have that many resources just yet. But I think I like the general idea of it. More than likely, I would make a boss specific to this area to serve as a champion. I set my pen down and stood up and stretched, happy to get off my ass for once. That chair was really starting to hurt. I glanced around the room, trying to decide what I wanted to do. Alessia seemed to be out for a while, which meant I wouldn't have anyone to talk to. Maybe I'll just lay in bed and see what's going on with my domain. It's been a bit since I last checked, and I remembered seeing some adventurers flocking in before I teleported back. I flopped onto my bed, curled up in my blanket, pulled the screen up, and saw that 4 parties were in at the moment. All had 4 people apiece, and they seemed to work together much like a group from D&D would. So nothing out of the ordinary. Currently, 3 parties were camped in the safe zone or close by it, which I should probably make more of now that I think about it. The 4th group looked like they were on the run from the ghasts, but I wasn't interested in seeing people get torn apart by those monstrosities. I glanced at my storage container near the bed and saw a small collection of coins that had accumulated in the past few hours. I dismissed the map and begrudgingly got out of bed and wandered over to it. So this place used coins instead of dollar bills or anything of the sort. I squatted down and picked up one that looked like it was made out of polished silver. On the front of the coin, there was a crown wreathed in leaves, and the sides looked like they were marked by tallies around the corner. I flicked the coin and caught it, and stared at it thoughtfully for a moment. Did that mean that I had to create a currency for this place? I probably would, and hopefully, something a bit more efficient than carrying around metal coins all the time. Hell, I'll maybe even make a merchant that could exchange the currency, though just the thought of trying to figure out how the currency transfers over made my head hurt. Economics made my head hurt, and doubly since I was the one trying to do it. Honestly, sitting here doing this makes me respect the heads of state back on Earth all the more. This shit sucked. I plucked a single silver coin from the crate and pocketed it while I consumed the rest and added it to my inventory. Hey, now that I have some of this world's currency, I can expand my treasure chests a bit more. I quickly located them and breathed a sigh of relief when I saw that most were still in good shape. A few were pillaged, but that was to be expected. I went ahead and spawned a few silver coins into each and closed out the tab from a distance. The best part about making anything that I wanted with thought is that I'll never actually run out of stuff. With that task finished, I checked out the stronghold to see how the troop numbers looked. So far, they didn't look too bad. The numbers were still steady, though they were dropping slowly. Maybe I should spawn in a platoon or 2 and let them march to the stronghold to reinforce them. Though it's doubtful that the adventurers would wipe out everything in the time that I was asleep. Better safe than sorry. Besides, if push came to shove, I would just move my Praetorians out to defend the stronghold while I made a new batch of soldiers and revived the bosses. But I would cross that bridge when I got to it. I yawned and closed out my tab and stared at my ceiling. I was a bit lonely, and it was a bit quiet without Alessia harassing me about stuff. It made me wonder what she was up to. But that was okay. I wouldn't prod her on the matter. I was just lonely, and really, I was growing more attached to her as time went by, though I wouldn't admit that to her. With a sigh, I closed my eyes and rolled over on my bed. I had such a long day ahead of me, and hopefully, nothing would go to shit in the time that I was asleep. I sat up and stretched. I felt fully restored and happy for once, and honestly, it was really lovely. With one last stretch, I stood up and gestured for my map to open to see what was going on. 3 more parties of adventurers had gotten into my domain, and 2 were currently fighting at the stronghold, though they looked to be on the losing end of things. Another quick look over showed I was also at my essence max, which was extremely exciting for me. However, I will assume that upgrading will use all my essence, so I have to hold off and focus on respawning mobs first. Otherwise, I would only leave myself in a vulnerable spot. I quickly spawned in 2 more platoons of the undead with a heavy mix of all the templates at my disposal and sent them with the reserve force towards the stronghold. That should do wonders for keeping the adventurers interested in stuff and fortifying the surrounding area for a bit longer. The last thing that I did was go through and check my treasure chests out to make sure that they weren't plundered. The ones that were I refilled and found a new place for them. With that task done, I watched the adventurers fight at the stronghold. So far, they seemed to hold their own, but I saw that they were slowly getting encircled from my bird's eye view. I stared at them for a moment before I dismissed the screen. It would be better for me not to see their faces. That way, I wouldn't be overly affected by their deaths. But speaking of which, I think a party must have wiped early, otherwise, my essence wouldn't have filled up as fast as it did. Quickly, I went through the domain and saw that they were wandering through shambling husks of their former selves. I counted at least 8 of them that were zombies. Though for me, that begged the question. What determines different undead when they died, or was it deterministic on how they died? I stared at the undead adventurers for a bit before I shrugged the thought away. I'm sure that I would find that out, eventually, at least. I guess I would have to have someone collect them to put them to rest. They deserved that much, at least. I panned the map out a bit, selected all 8 of them, and directed them towards a spot where I could teleport them away from the central part of the domain and take their equipment. More than likely, we would just redistribute it through the ranks, with the veteran undead getting first dibs next to the bosses. As the undead was busy traveling to the destination that I had in mind, I sat back on my bed a bit and wiped away my bleary eyes. I was getting used to all the administration that I was doing. Thankfully, I didn't really have to deal with the troop placements. If I had to micromanage everything to that degree, I would probably lose my mind. I cleared my throat and saw the door open as Alessia walked in. Her hair was braided this time, and she was wearing a fresh uniform. "Good morning, Alessia." I flashed her a warm smile as I stood up and quickly changed clothing. "Good morning, my lady. Did you sleep well?" she asked as she gave me a bow. "Yeah, better than I have in a long time." I shook out my cloak and grabbed a stack of new clothing that I kept near my bed. "I'm glad. Is there anything I can do for you today?" Alessia stepped into the room and closed the door behind her. I sat down in my chair and fixed my hair the best I could. I felt dirty, but I didn't want to go up to the lake, nor did I want to create one down here. At least not until I had enough essence saved up to do something like that. "No, not really, I have no actual plans other than lounging around down here for the time being." She stepped up behind me, and I stiffened slightly as I felt a pair of cold hands touch my scalp, knocking mine away. "Then let's spend some time together, you are always out and about. Take some time for yourself." I relaxed a bit as I let her work on my hair, and I couldn't help but chuckle. "It just seems like you want to keep me for yourself today, Alessia." "Perhaps. Is there anything that you particularly want to do?" Her fingers moved through my hair with ease, and I could feel it getting braided. Honestly, it was times like this that I missed Earth. I wish I could lounge around all day and watch some TV or close my eyes and listen to music. But alas, here I am, a prisoner in a land of my design. I'm not sure what there really is for us to do. I mulled it over, which sadly took a bunch more time than I thought it would. I mean, I was so used to doing stuff on my phone and whatnot that I never really thought about the non-electronic stuff there was. At least until it hit me. "Alessia, do you know how to play cards?" I asked as I quickly brought up my menu and quickly created them. "I can't say that I do." "What did you have in mind?" Her fingers kept combing through my hair as I relaxed more and relished the feeling. "Well, we could play a bunch of them, a few betting games, or just a few for fun. I'll teach a few that I have in mind," I told her as I quickly created a batch of 52 cards. However, instead of creating the traditional card set, I kept the spades and hearts suites. I ended up making a suite of stars and swords for the rest. I would enjoy that. Her hands quickly finished the task at hand, and she sauntered over to my view and sat down on the chair across from me. I nodded and quickly began creating them as I sat back in my chair. "Good, good. If you don't mind, would you mind gathering Hector and Amari? Games like this would be far more fun than with just 2 people." As I started creating poker chips and various coins to bet with, I told her. "I mean, you can't play cards and not bet anything. The only thing missing was alcohol. Maybe when that one adventurer comes back, I'll see about getting some." A faint look of disappointment flashed through her eyes as she stood up and gave me a soft bow. "Of course, Empress." Her words seemed to be flat and expressionless, and I mentally frowned at how different they felt at that moment. I flashed her a smile and reached out to her. "Don't be sad, I'll figure out something for us to do later." She froze for a second before her smile returned. "Of course, my lady." With one last bow, she left the room. I turned my attention back to the cards and chips as they were brought into existence, and I grinned. Oh, I was about to take all their money. But I suppose I should teach them first, so that way, I won't feel as bad about it later. Speaking of money, I probably should start devising a currency and setting up shops around the domain. So at least that way, I can start building the economy up in a direction that I like. I stared at the pile of coins on my table and thought it over. I'll probably just stick with what I know from Earth. Paper cash, set up close to what I know. with my lowest cash denomination sitting at a $1 bill. The next will be a $2, 5, 10, 25, 50, and then a $100 bill. Mostly since I didn't want bills higher than that floating around, since it would be a pain in the ass to keep track of. Honestly, the whole thought of it was bothersome, but the things that I do just to make this place more realistic. The only thing that I wasn't sure how to do is currency exchange, mostly since I wasn't sure how to make it have value. I mean, I hardly paid attention in my economics class, so it was above me. But let's be real here. I can say the money is worth the amount is written on it, and no one can really say otherwise. As the domain grows, I can quickly instill taxes on vendors and force adventurers to use my currency to buy specific stuff, so I can keep a supply of money coming in to help back mine. I shrugged and quickly created a template for each denomination I had in mind. The standard color theme between them would be a deep vibrant blue, matched with a bright purple that filled the borders and then filled in various blotches with a reflective hue. In the middle of the first bill, I went with a sword clad in lightning impaled into the ground, and a star burned behind it in the distance. It was simple, and it would be nice to start everything. For the next one, I went with the face of the first emperor of Asteria, which I modeled after one of my favorite historical figures, Flavius Belisarius. Though sadly, I had a little reference for him outside of a few artists' renditions, I was using my imagination here, so there was no reason I couldn't do things as I saw fit. So I took the standard drawing of him that I've seen and made it a bit more stylized and a bit more severe, though my memory was lacking in that regard. I just did various designs that I thought were appropriate for the next few bits of currency. I just did a stylistic clock for the 5, with the hands stuck on midnight. The 10 was of a palace with dozens of towers that honestly had no purpose other than to just exist and take up space. The $25 bill had the portrait of a female, who I named Theodora. She had a soft face, with hair that stopped at the top of her shoulders. As for more details than that, it was a bit harder since I was doing this for a paper currency. Otherwise, I would have gone all out. With that finished, I will now dub her Theodora. I went with a front view of the Colosseum that I would eventually build for the $50 bill and put a sun above it. Finally, for the last bill, I decided I would go with my face, and since no adventurer has seen it, no one would know that it was me they were looking at. So with that thought process, I decided I wanted to go with a portrait design of me, with my hair in a woven warrior braid. Was it narcissistic of me? Perhaps, but who was gonna tell me I couldn't do it? Happy with all of that, I created a bunch of the cash, so at least we would have something to gamble with that would be of use later, since I planned on phasing out the usage of coins the best I could. I fold. Alessia threw her cards down, along with Hector and Amari, and I chuckled evilly to myself as I reached out and pulled back the massive pile of chips. I felt a little bad about wiping them clean, but I enjoyed winning. The chips scraped our gaming table as I pulled them backward and clattered all together as they fell into the small hole I made for them. Shall we go for another? I asked as I collected all the cards. Much to my dismay, everyone shook their heads. I wanted to be sad, but we have been doing this for the last few hours, so they were expected to want to be done. That and the fact I just cleaned the house. It took them a bit to get the hang of the game, along with the proper use of the currency, but once they got it, the game went on pretty smoothly. I lost a few early, which was good. I wanted to get their hopes up and make them all in, so I could start raking in cash. Without a second thought, I quickly gathered all the chips and quickly started to count out everyone's winnings. Hector, for you win $100 even. Amari, you are up by 110, and Alessia, you pulled in only 50. I told them as I quickly counted the chips and distributed the cash. While they couldn't use it right now, I would have to start implementing ways shortly. I wonder if I could set up shop somewhere in here. That also means that I have to set up salaries and whatnot, and honestly, keeping track of it all sounds like a pain in my ass. Maybe if I could get Karen off of ferryman duty, I could change his position to the treasurer or something of the sort. It would be a lot safer than him dealing with adventurers every day. I distributed the money around the circle and saw that Alessia looked morose. What's wrong? I asked as I slid a $50 bill in her direction. I don't enjoy losing. She told me through a pout as she folded up the 50 and slid it into one of her pockets. When I first started playing this game, my chef cleaned me out once. I was devastated, but he taught me a lot that I know now. I told her as I quickly counted my earnings, which tallied up to well over $300. If only my money had value here. It's still embarrassing. She told me as she huffed and crossed her arms. Yeah. I told her as I tucked away my cash. Just get good. I laughed as I stood up, and so did everyone else. Alessia clearly didn't know how to react to my shit talking, but really, it was fun to finally talk shit with people. Even if they were not totally alive. Ah, how have I missed this? It's been so long. I sat back in my chair in a mild euphoria for the first time in such a long time. Alessia stared at the table with a frown on her face and her arms crossed across her chest. Come on, Alessia, cheer up, it's just a game, I told her as I cleaned up the chips. The other two had already left the room, leaving us two behind. I know, it just isn't fair. She told me as she lounged across the table, with her head face down. I could hardly hear her muffled voice. There. I reached out and patted her back. I couldn't get over how cute it was seeing her looking so defeated. The poor girl must really take the loss pretty hard. She sat there for a little longer as I neatly stacked all the chips up in all the spots. Come along, Alessia, I'm going to go work on some stuff. I gestured to her as I walked towards my office area. I had fun, so now it was work time. There was some stuff I needed to work on for the future of the domain. I sat down at my desk and rifled through my notebook while Alessia shambled into my room, threw herself into her chair, grabbed one book that she likes to read, and sat there quietly brooding over her loss. I, on the other hand, fleshed out more ideas. Maybe I should make a central bank to help manage the cash and eventually place Karen in some sort of management position. If I had some computers or something of the sort, that would be fantastic in keeping track of the cash flow. But here I am. It was times like this that I really wished that I had the technology. I would love to build some here if I could, but I had no idea how it worked outside of super simplified basics. Maybe I should start with electricity and then combine that with magic. Hell, with that, I could eventually make tech that could rival that of Earth. Well, not me specifically, but with what I can do. I quickly penned in my ideas and named it the Central Asterian Bank. As for the rest, I would figure it out, but it would be super helpful in the future, especially for storing all my excess stuff and whatnot. I could also include the adventurers. I can make an entire division strictly for storing their goods and hiding them away from the outside world. It would be like Switzerland, and it would help with cash flow and resources on my end. Mainly since I can recreate anything I consume. Was I overextending myself on the matter? A little, but if I keep navigating myself into a spot that would be invaluable, then the chances of people attempting to kill me off become all the lower. All the while, I would benefit and only grow more potent at the end. I bit the end of my pen as I kept working out plans and extensions for it. But I had to be sure that I wasn't cramming too much in at once. After all, I still had to consider the use of my resources. I brought up the town's design that I have been tinkering with and slotted in a bank near the center of the town, but then I also increased the projected size of the town slightly for it to make sense. With that done, I glanced at my essence bar and saw that it had filled up once more. I cracked my fingers and decided that I should have my companion here. I opened up my menu and quickly typed a message for Karen, explaining that I wanted him here to guide me through upgrading my domain. With that being done, I sat back and cracked my fingers. Now it was time to wait. Ah, it's that time, isn't it, mistress? Karen appeared and gave me a swift bow. Maybe a while ago, I would have been uncomfortable with it. But now, it was simply a part of the job. Of course. Is there anything that I should keep in mind while I'm doing this? The only thing that is vital for you to know is that you will be vulnerable while the process goes through. You will lose access to most of your abilities for the upgrade duration. I recommend you check to ensure that your domain is in peak condition while the process unfolds. As he spoke, he took a seat across from me. How long will it take? I nodded my head and motioned for my map to appear, and I looked it over. The reinforcements had already arrived at the stronghold, and all the treasure chests looked to be in peak condition. I religiously checked every facet of my domain, ensuring that everything was up to par. About 48 hours, however, you won't have to do anything other than press the button. Karen crossed his legs and lowered his hood, revealing his skull. His red eyes seemed to fluctuate in brightness as he spoke. I stared at him for a moment longer as I tried to figure out what he was feeling. Even after knowing him for all this time, I could never tell what the skeleton was thinking or feeling. I tore my gaze from him and quickly rifled through my menu and found the upgrade button. I stared at it for a moment as reality hit me. Everything was progressing, and with this, I was another step closer. Though it felt like with each step I took, what I really wanted seemed to change ever so slightly. At first, I wanted to go home, and I still do. But at the end of this all, I want to both keep this place and go home. I pressed the button and confirmed that I wanted to upgrade the domain and held my breath as the screen flickered for a few tense seconds. I waited for something grand to happen, which disappointingly never did. Instead, in the corner of my eye, a timer popped up, counting down from 47 hours and 59 minutes. With that task out of the way, I dismissed the screen and sat forward, lacing my fingers together. Thank you for the help. While that is finishing, I have a proposition for you. The skeleton mashed his teeth together and sat forward. What would that be, mistress? Well, once this upgrade finishes, and I have the resources built back up, I want to expand the domain quite a bit and create a town. On top of that expansion, I want to create an in-dungeon currency, and I was curious if you wanted to run everything. I rifled through my papers and found the one that held my ideas about the currency and the bank and slid it over to him. Karen took the paper and read it over. This is rather interesting. I've never heard of a currency not backed by anything. Yeah, it's how the economy in my world functions. The money has no value other than what we give through supply and demand, which is where I want to start here. I think we can set up a few merchant areas and sell some unique dungeon items that can only be exchanged with this currency. Which means I will need to set up a currency exchange rate. I sat back in my chair and rapidly sorted through the ideas in my mind. What is the precious metal exchange rate in your world? My companion sat the paper down on the edge of my desk and sat back in his seat. That's an excellent question, and to be quite honest with you, it depends on the metal. However, I want to avoid using that since the value is so high. I don't want to create billions worth of dollars. So I thought we might create our own exchange rate and use the outer world currency as a backing or reserve fund if we need it. That is a good idea. If we keep the money flowing, we should be able to get away with not having to create currency using our essence, which would keep the essence use somewhat efficient. I like the idea so far, mistress. However, there are some flaws that we should consider. Karen sat forward and reached out to the stack of blank paper that I kept nearby, and I passed him my pen. What would that be? I asked as I quickly tried to rack my mind for what I could have missed. Well, first off, we would need a workforce. Few would be smart enough to count or do the math with our current roster of the undead, which would relegate the task solely to me for the time being. The next problem would be storage. While we can use you to teleport stuff around, eventually, it would grow to be impossible if the adventurers use this system frequently. As he spoke, the sound of my pen scratching punctuated the silence between his words. He had two very valid points. I would have to create entities that were intelligent if I wanted them. As for storage, we would have to work on that later. For now, I wouldn't have an issue with moving stuff around and keeping it safe. I would hate for the adventurers to pillage a bank vault, though I would be sure to reinforce it significantly. Other than that stuff, though, what do you think? Overall, it's a fantastic idea. We can work out the kinks while waiting for the domain to finish upgrading. I have to applaud you with the stuff that you are coming up with, though. You are attempting to establish yourself as a political entity outside of developing a simple slaughter pit for adventurers to chug through, which is just as strong as having a domain filled with powerful beasts. I couldn't help but fill with pride as Karen spoke. It made me happy that I was doing well in his eyes. Perhaps, after all, I wasn't a disappointment. Very well. Let's hammer out some more ideas while waiting for the domain to finish upgrading. Oh, by the way, do you need to be back to the dock at any point to ferry adventurers across? My companion shook his bony head. No, they rarely come around this time of day. Though I will keep my eye on it. It won't be a problem if you have to bail to take care of them. It would give me some time to mull over our ideas a bit more. Oh Karen, are you skilled in urban development at all? I want to run some town ideas by you. However, be warned I will use some city structures from my world. A few hours later. Wait, they have buildings that reach that high into the sky? I swear I could faintly hear surprise crawl across my companion's usual monotonous voice. Yes, however, I want to stay away from buildings that size for now. That won't be for quite some time. What I have in mind at the moment is a small town, or city reminiscent of what I know. I leaned over my desk with an absurdly large piece of paper and my Sharpie in hand. You don't want to make something the adventurers would recognize? Not quite. Once I expand the domain and come across the town, it will set the tone for the rest of the domain. Up to this point, they have only seen military installations. What I want them to see next is what the civilian life looks like here. He stood up straight and tapped his chin with his finger as he looked at my hastily drawn urban map. It would be interesting. Tell me, though, does having multiple lane roads really make sense though? I mean, if at most we have a buggy, it would be pointless to have anything over 2 lanes. Well, you see, Karen, there is something I have in mind. I want to build up the environment in a way that doesn't pigeonhole me. I intend on at least trying to create a hybrid between magic here and tech that I know of from Earth. It would keep things interesting and would keep me busy while I lounge around my office for now. I capped my Sharpie, placed it on my table, and glanced towards my companion. While I lacked the use of magic and fine knowledge of technology from Earth, that couldn't stop me from utilizing concepts in my vast array of rabbit hole knowledge. You astound me, Calixa. Instead of just doing the bare minimum, you keep trying to push everything further and further. He stood there for a moment, unmoving, as he stared at the urban design. I chuckled and smoothed the front of my robe nervously. Thanks. Don't think anything of it, I'm going to keep working at stuff until I know it's perfect. He nodded his head at me and gave me what I hoped was an attempt at a smile. You do more than enough, Calixa. No matter how much I do, I can always do more, I told him as I leaned forward and grabbed the Sharpie and went back to work at fleshing out the city design, desperate to get away from the topic. Mostly since it made me slightly uncomfortable addressing why I'm the way I am. Anyways, do you think the city hall would do well here? I asked as I pointed to a spot roughly in the middle of the town. I think it is great. It makes sense, and it would be easily accessible. He mused quietly as he looked it over. I made a mental note to keep it and moved on to the next part. I was going to be here for quite some time. I had no idea how to plan out a town, and I wanted this one to be perfect, so while I had the time, I might as well figure it out the best that I could. I sat down at my desk with a burning headache. Karen had already wandered off to take care of the new batch of adventurers that had wandered in, leaving me to do one last look over the city design to make sure that everything was taken care of. So far, we have changed around some commercial districts, combined them more with the residential areas, and ensured that each could be easily reached, though I still had ways to design some public transportation. Maybe I could create a smaller version of my teleportation as a way to move around the city. If it got big enough, of course. Though it was still something to ponder. We also decided to upgrade the town into a smaller city and make it roughly 30 square kilometers, so it wouldn't be something to scoff at. However, because of the sheer size and resource usage, we will break the creation into multiple parts and constantly expand it as needed. The city's first phase would be the outskirts, filled with tiny houses and retail areas, but nothing that would hint at the overall size. At least that I hoped so. Once the outskirts were finished being made, I could start working my way inwards. At least, that was the plan. This was exhausting, and what made it worse was that I didn't know exactly what to do for city planning. I sat back in my chair and rubbed my eyes. I stared at the ceiling for a bit, spacing out until I heard claws scraping concrete. I sat up, unsure of what I was hearing, only to see a pack of wolves sitting in my doorway. 5, to be exact, plus the one that I claimed as my own. Looks like the little guy brought home some friends. Wolves are pack creatures, after all, though I wish I would have known beforehand what it was planning. I wasn't expecting to have so many pets here. I stared at them as I tried to decide if I wanted to keep them or not. But thankfully, it only took a few quick seconds for me to decide. I mean, I didn't have to feed them, nor did I have to do a lot to take care of them. They would do their own thing, and I wouldn't have to do anything more. With a sigh of resignation, I gestured for the small pack to file into the room, and they took a spot in the far corner. Once my domain upgrades finish, I would have to make them all a bed since it would feel wrong to let them sleep on the floor. I watched them and thought of a few names as they were settling in. For the first one, I would name him Grim, a little on the nose, but it would do. As for the rest, well, I had to figure it out. I put my feet on my desk, settled in, and gestured for Grim to come over so I could rub his head. I spared a quick glance at my screen and saw the domain only had a few more hours left before the upgrade finished. But what could I do while I was waiting? I pondered the thought before realizing I should probably focus more on my training in my downtime. That was something that I couldn't be slacking on since it was vital to ensure this domain stayed strong. I looked through my stats and skills, seeing what I needed to work on. Maybe I should meditate and get my key core up on another level. It saved my ass during that fight with the assassins, and it wasn't something that I overly minded working on. Right after, though, I needed to work on my soul since that was the basis of everything I was working on. I gave Grim one last pat on the head before I stood up and tried to find a semi-quiet place to meditate at. Sadly, my rock was out of the question for now due to all of the adventurers in my domain. I took a deep breath and fell into the key realm. The ball of ki that dominated my main domain was spinning around, sucking up the haze that still continued to permeate the area. However, instead of the pure orange that I was familiar with, the sphere had turned into a ghostly white color, with the bolts of lightning that came from it a muted gray. That must be because of the draconic ki that I now had. I sat down on my platform, ignoring the bolts of lightning that danced around me, slamming into the ground with thunderous explosions. The surrounding haze gently caressed my flesh and began filling up all my pores. Though it felt like no matter what I did, the haze didn't threaten to drown me like it did last time. Maybe I was doing something wrong. I focused on the energy and found that it now reacted to my mental commands, though it wasn't to an extreme degree. It was much like running my hand through the water and having the energy part rush back into the empty space. When I used ki, it was much like a volcano, which feels so inefficient. What if I changed its overall direction? I nuzzled the surrounding energy in a tight elliptical shape since it felt right. The energy gently rotated around me as I quickly tried to coax it forward. At first, the energy didn't react all that much. But then the surrounding haze shifted, and a silhouette formed around the sphere that hung in the sky. At first, it was faint, but as I coaxed the energy forward, more fog was torn from the ground and joined the disk, solidifying around the core. The sphere grew, and the disk encircled it seemed to extend outwards as the interior spiraled inwards and connected with the central core. The core grew darker and trembled as the surrounding disk sucked energy from it before they both seemed to enter a state of equilibrium. I felt something click inside of me as the energy started to cycle on its own, and the sphere became almost impossible to stare at as it grew in unbearable radiance. Congratulations! You have unlocked the Radiant Lightning Core, Draconic version. All ki expenditure will now be faster and more efficient. I stared up at the core as the surrounding disk seemed to draw in the fog and slowly drug it into an orbit around the sphere, much like watching water circle a drain. The lightning grew even more potent as it filled the sky in brilliant displays of power. I stood up and clenched my fist as I went through the steps of shifting my ki into various parts of my body. Instead of an explosion, it was as if the ki was already in motion. I clenched my fist, and I felt a smile growing across my face. Good, I was getting stronger. All I had to do now was practice with it for a bit before I went to my soul realm. I stood in the extensive training area I had constructed a while ago. The lights above were slightly dimmed, and a bunch of my guards was in here practicing with one another or running drills. However, Alessia and a few of the guard officers were in the corner with me. Hector and Amari stood before me with their weapons bared. Alessia had her arms crossed as she stared at me with a strange look. Are you sure that this is a good idea? Yeah. Besides, the only way I'm going to get stronger is by practice. I flicked my cloak behind me and clenched my metal fist as I mentally steeled myself for the sparring session. The goal was to only dodge everything coming my way the best I could and only by using ki and my physical prowess. Alessia pinched her nose and shook her head. I heavily disagree with this, but if it's what you command, then I will begrudgingly allow it. I shrugged as I loosened up my shoulders. It's not like she had too much to say, I would have done it regardless. Once I was finished rolling my shoulders, I made a come-hither motion towards my two undead. Hector stepped forward and stabbed his spear forward while Amari vanished from sight. The tip of the spear rushed towards my face, and I sidestepped and felt a presence appear behind me. Without thinking, I twisted my body and caught the blade with my hand while forcing my body up to kick away Hector's spear. I felt a primal grin cross my face as the adrenaline coursing through my blood. I danced around the two. Though I was enjoying this dance, I realized that my body couldn't react as fast as my mind was. No matter what I did, there was always a small lag. But it didn't matter. The two couldn't hope to keep up with my movements. After what felt like hours of this, my stamina was running low, so I cut the exercise short and focused on trying to catch my breath. Not bad at all, Empress. You have improved greatly since the last time we spared. Alessia's voice sounded close by as I felt her hand rest on my shoulder. Thanks. This ki core upgrade did wonders for my speed. I just have to work on the reflexes now, and I think I'm set. I stood up and tucked back some of the hair that had managed to escape from the confines of my hood. We will work on that. As soon as we are able, I highly recommend that we work on the hand-to-hand combat a bit more. She patted off the back of my cloak and rested the polearm against the ground. Sounds like a plan, Alessia, sounds like a plan. I walked into my room, stretched out my sore muscles, and sat in my chair. Thankfully, I've done this enough to finally get over the pain stage, and now, it was just a steady burn that ate away at all of my muscles. I yawned as I sat back and figured out my plan. My domain had a little over an hour left for the upgrade to finish. I did consider a little more training, but I was a little too burned out to worry about doing anything with my soul at the moment. I glanced over at my bed and decided to take a nap, then deal with my domain getting its upgrade. Maybe afterward I can cook. With my mind made up, I walked over to my bed, crawled into it, and stretched out. The relief was almost orgasmic as my sore muscles stretched. I nestled into my pillow and stared up at the ceiling for a little while before my eyes meandered over to my map. Lately, before I went to sleep, something has been gnawing at me to make sure that everyone was okay before I slept. The adventurers were still around, and a few fresh faces seemed to have arrived while I was training. Overall, everything looked to be good. The stronghold seemed to hold well. The only sad thing was that one outpost was taken by the adventurers, and they seemed like they were setting up shop there. Not that I was complaining since it was keeping them in the domain. With that fact settled, I rolled over, pressed my face into my pillow, and drifted off to sleep. When I awoke, it was to a few notifications blinking incessantly in the corner of my eye. I rubbed my bleary eyes and quickly read the stuff over. Congratulations! You now have a Tier 2 domain. Plus 5,000 essence have been awarded to you. You can now have 4 more bosses. All essence costs are now reduced slightly, and creation speed has been increased. You can now have up to Tier 4 mob units. Overall, it wasn't too bad. A little less climactic than I would have expected, but that's alright. I sat up, wiped away my bleary eyes, and tried to plan out my day. First things first, I have to go through and ensure that the troops are doing well, along with the treasure chests. I quickly scrolled through the map, restocked a few of the treasure chests, consumed a few dead adventures, and took their equipment for my use. Once I was finished, I sat up and walked over to my desk, deciding that I wanted to cook, so I needed to look through my templates to see what I was working with. I knew for sure I had pots, pans, knives, and some herbs. I started humming quietly as I searched through my templates and quickly separated them based on use. The dead adventurers even had various herbs, spices, and even some proteins. I cackled as I looked over everything and quickly went to look at everything else that I needed. I lacked an oven, a stove, and a few other key things, but I think I can do with what I have. If only I could use magic, I'm sure that I could do something with all this. I strummed my fingers across the desk as I tried to figure some stuff out. Out of curiosity, I looked through some templates from the recently deceased to see if I could find something of use. Let's see here, some nice armor weapons. Oh, there is even a wand. But nothing that could directly help me at the moment. I sat back in my chair and ran a few ideas through my mind. Why don't I make a flat top? I could start a fire under a steel plate and use that to cook. I could also do a hastily made stovetop the same way. I stood in a cleared out area underground that was 100 meters long in all directions. It was a little excessive, but I fully planned on decking this place with all the equipment I could imagine. Now all I had to do was set up some stuff so a fire wouldn't start and so I wouldn't asphyxiate. It was just a matter of how I should do it. In the meantime, I suppose I could make a small vent way to the surface, but I would have to hide it or find a way to recycle the stuff. Putting that thought to the side, I created a large metal table that was about 2 meters long, sat it down near the wall, and then designed a wooden board to go right on top of it. I added a decent shelf underneath it to store many pots and pans. While I could put doors and whatnot in there, it didn't feel right. I'd instead just leave it open, so I could grab what I needed. As that was coming into existence, I started designing what would function as my flat top. Since it couldn't be anything super fancy, I created a small area underneath a small steel slab that would house the firewood and place it on another small steel slab that I could pull out and keep clean. Along with a small divot near the top that I could use to scrape all the excess stuff into so I could clean it out later. As with the prep table that I made earlier, I added a shelf underneath it to store more equipment that I would need in the future. I stepped back and watched as my new items were in the process of being created. Now, all I had to do was create some spatulas, an oven, a stovetop, a trash can for sure, and a few other items. Unfortunately, I have nothing to create a refrigerator with, so I can't make too much stuff, otherwise, it would go bad. It was times like this that I really missed stuff from Earth. Finally, I finished my makeshift kitchen. My oven was a bit of a pain to make since it's essentially going to be a bit of a smoker, which would throw off the taste of my food, but I would have to figure out how to make something slightly better. But that would be something to work on later. As for my stove, I went with a small fire under a metal grate that would allow the flames to reach upwards and act as a stovetop. I grabbed my notebook and jotted out a list of equipment I would need. So far, I for sure had a traditional pan. I would make a soup pot, along with an extra-sized one, to make some broths and whatnot. I would probably make a wok just to have one since woks are life. On top of that, I would need some spoons, forks, plates, spatulas, whisks, strainers, bowls, and a few other dozen small things. From the looks of it, I would need to increase my storage space since I intended to make a metric fuck ton of food in the future. With my list in hand, I quickly went to work designing and creating all the tools that I needed. Sadly, I couldn't do anything overly fancy since I had to worry about not biting too far into my resource reserves. As I worked, I was growing a little more excited. I got to cook again, and the best part is, it's on my own time. No more standing in a line for 14 hours a day or more, making the same food. Now I can cook when I want, and whatever I want, and there was no one here to tell me otherwise. Now it was time for me to tally up what I had in the way of spices and food. Let's see, I have salt, cilantro, mint, and a couple that I wasn't sure about since the system gave them names that I've never heard before, so I would do some testing and see. Hopefully, they were stupidly obvious and something that I knew how to use. As for the rest, I had some uncooked poultry and pork, along with some cooked chicken, which I would try to see how it was and if I could do anything with it. What I really wish I had here, though, was some seafood, and other proteins, like steak, or just the whole animal, so I could make my own cuts, but it is what it is. As I was humming to myself, I quickly created a sample of all the herbs at my disposal. Cilantro was, well, cilantro, what more could I say there? Mint was one of my favorites, though I questioned what I could use it for outside of making some tea. Salt was salt and was one of the most vital spices. Now, it was time to test the stuff I didn't know about. The first one up was called braise leaf and looked a lot like basil. I picked it up, ran my fingers across its surface, and smelled it. Yep, that definitely smelled like it. I set the leaf to the side, quickly scribbled in what it was in my notebook, and went to the next. This time it was a small bundle of leaves with tiny cloves on top called yudu, which looked oddly familiar, though I couldn't place why. I picked off a small leaf and placed it on my tongue. As I tasted it, I realized it was a type of parsley. Now onto the final one. This time it was a black powdery substance called pepperine. Now, if common sense tells me anything, this would be black pepper, which would be a boon. I reached out, dipped my finger into the substance, tasted it, and nodded my head while grimacing. Ah yes, it was black pepper. So far, this was a solid haul. Now, it was time to throw together some food. Now I needed to gather ingredients and start doing more elaborate dishes. Maybe I could even use it as leverage outside of here. We are offering you this on your own terms. Before the domain erases who you were. You already feel it, don't you? The voices that whisper in your ear. The scattered thoughts and memories that you know aren't yours yet are slowly becoming a part of you. I stood up and used the hilt of my poleaxe and drug it across the metal bars, filling the room with the sound of metal being struck, with each strike being slower than the last. The zombie looked uncertain as he stepped back. I could feel the fear radiating in agonizingly sweet waves from him as I made my threat. You're lying. Everyone in this domain went through what you are going through now. We all embraced it, and now we live happy lives, serving our Empress. If you choose to remain defiant, then I will leave you down here with your compatriots, and you will rot here until the end of time. If you tell me what I want to know, and agree to my terms, then I will allow you to pick your future before the last of who you are erodes. I clanged my polearm against the iron bar one last time before I walked back over to my chair and sat down. You're a monster. The zombie whispered out as he collapsed. The others barely glanced at him as they shuffled around the small cell. I do what I must in service to my lady. Now, do you accept my terms? This will be the last time that I offer it. The next time we meet, you will be just a mindless undead, enslaved to the domain. I crossed my legs and rested my poleaxe across my laps. The zombie gazed at me for a moment before he closed his eyes. Fine, I accept. What do you wish to know? I felt the start of a smile start to cross my face as I sat forward. Who sent you and why? The Theocracy of Velcrest. They sent us to dispose of Redrick and his team and make it look like the domain did it. As for why, well, they wanted to ensure that his family line had no chance of returning and threatening them. The zombie assassin spoke, his words filled with defeat. Does this theocracy pose any threat to Asteria? I didn't care about that mortal being. All that mattered to me was the Empress. Yes. They are followers of the god of nature, and once they hear about a domain of the undead, they will surely make a move, at least if the other countries don't make a move to stop them. I felt the faintest twinges of fear as his words weighed in on me. I know the lady has been doing her best to ensure that we have political clout, but that was still bad news. We would have to prepare for it. Thank you. Now, since you have cooperated, I will transfer you elsewhere. Once there, you will meet with a woman named Amari. You are to do as she says and teach her all of your skills. If you even consider trying to make a break for it, I promise you will yearn for the release of death. I told him as I stood up and walked out of the cell, motioning for the guards to start the transfer. This information was troublesome for many reasons. The first was that I wasn't sure if I should tell the Empress or not. Everything screamed at me that I had to, but I also knew how she would react. I walked out of the room, shut the door, and slammed my fist into the wall. I really didn't know what to do. I hummed to myself as I added some salt and pepper onto the chicken I cooked, along with some crushed and dried parsley. I pulled the chicken onto the plate and cut off a piece to see how it tasted. It wasn't much, but it would do for now, at least until I collected more cooking materials. I bit into it and nodded my head as I rolled it over my tongue. It was a little dry, maybe a tad bit more salt, and it would be passable. But I didn't care about that. I was just happy that I had food for once. I ripped off another piece of chicken, relishing the taste. It's been so long since I've eaten food, I feel like I could cry from happiness. I had to tear myself away from my food as I looked around the kitchen to ensure everything was turned off and nothing would catch fire. Once I was happy, I grabbed the plate and wandered back to my office. I sat down at my desk, scarfed down my food, and looked over my notes. Let's see, the city planning is finished, all that is left is building it. My domain has been stocked up and resupplied, so that's good. It just left me to train my soul, which I didn't know how to do. I mindlessly ate at the chicken wing while preparing myself for the experience. The last time I did something with this, it hurt, and that level of pain was something that I wasn't all that keen on feeling again. I gobbled down the last of the chicken greedily before I pushed the plate away and looked around. My office was empty, with Alessia gone once more. I had no idea where she was going, but it was lonely here without her. The wolves were gone as well, doing whatever it was they did. Maybe I was just procrastinating like I usually do. I know why I was doing it. But I guess if I kept putting it off like this, I wouldn't benefit. With a heavy sigh, I pushed away from my desk and sat on the floor, crossing my legs. I shifted slightly as I tried to prepare myself. I took one last deep breath and closed my eyes, and I felt myself plummet as I fell through my realms. When my eyes opened, I was staring up into the night sky. The constellation of a dragon stood tall and proud. Its face reared up towards the sky, with its wings expanded. Underneath it was a sphere with a light that shot towards the sky in a radiant beam, cutting through the darkness with ease. I stood there, staring at my soul. The white energy danced and blended with flares of purple as the orb sat there with a single white flame that seemed to orbit it. The light flickered in the darkness and seemed to recede as I got closer to it. Now, what was I supposed to do here? I reached out to my soul, and my fingers pushed into its surface. The energy flowed around my hand as if it was syrup, and I felt a strange stirring deep within me. I pulled my hand out, and the energy seeped through my fingers, much like water, as it rushed back into its place. Now, how was I going to do this? I bit my lip as I tried to think about everything I could do. I reached my hand back in and gently tugged at it once more. A spark of pain exploded in my chest as I quickly let go of it. The memory of what it felt like before was all too painfully fresh for me. Come on, think there has to be a way. Let's see, for my key, I meditate, so maybe I have to do something of the sort for this as well. I adjusted my cloak, sat down from where my soul originated and closed my eyes. I took a deep breath and felt the energy swirl around the room. Unlike my key which seemed to originate in my body, this energy seemed to come from outside and gather inside of this core. With another deep breath, I tried to focus on the energy that rushed around me and catch it. But it kept slipping through the spaces. I bit my lip and chided myself for getting a little antsy. I remembered what happened when I did that while trying to meditate with my key, and that was a mistake that I wasn't willing to make with my soul. Instead, I calmed my mind and focused on the energy that flowed around me. I focused on gently guiding it into a tight orbit around my soul, but instead of a torrential rush, it was just a tiny trickle. Eventually, I felt my soul tug on the energy. It was only the faintest of traces, but it was a start. I repeated the process in and out, even though I was extremely bored. I guess I was going to be here for quite some time. After what felt like an eternity, I opened up my eyes and felt a heavy presence deep within me. Though I wouldn't describe it as painful, just uncomfortable. I glanced at my soul and saw that it swelled up a bit, and a couple of notifications scrolled across my screen.